Tuha 1. Reinforcements arrive. Expelliarmus! Dewey apparated behind Saruman, and the spell struck true. Saruman's staff flew from his hand, and Dewey's own staff, knocked loose earlier, whisked back into his grip. Without hesitation, Dewey apparated again before Saruman could retaliate. Saruman's face darkened. He had never expected a dignified white wizard to be bested by this brat. Saruman lifted his staff and murmured an ancient Quenya incantation. The words rolled over the wilderness, and the sky immediately turned leaden. Dewey felt a prickle of dread. The air seemed to thicken, and his hair rose on end. Then lightning arced straight for him. He apparated, but the bolt found his new position with uncanny precision, as if the storm itself was tracking him. An owl Patronus flashed in from afar, alighted on Dewey's shoulder, and melted into him as if its duty were done. Dewey's face brightened. "They're finally here." Saruman's unease sharpened at the smile. "What are you laughing at?" "You fell into the trap," Dewey said with a smug grin. A figure swept down from the sky on a broomstick. "Dewey, I'm not too late, am I?" Gandalf landed beside him, breathless and grinning. "If I'd been any later, you might have had to rescue me from Orthanc." Dewey grinned back, then glanced around. "Where are Lady Galadriel and Lord Elrond? Haven't they arrived yet?" Gandalf laughed. "I came straight from Edoras when I got your message. Galadriel and Elrond first sent the Ents to take Isengard. They'll join us once that's done." Saruman, below, went ashen with suspicion and rage. "Gandalf, explain yourself. Why are Galadriel and Elrond attacking my domain? Are you coming to wage war on me?" Gandalf's expression hardened with disappointment as he descended to stand before Saruman. "Saruman, you were once the foremost of the 5 wizards who came to Middle-earth to oppose evil. Now you have fallen into collusion with Sauron. Do you still remember your duty?" Saruman bristled. "Don't smear me, Gandalf. For 100 years, I've fought evil. My deeds aren't something you can slander." "I know you've coveted my place," Saruman continued agitatedly. "In the White Council, you, Galadriel, and Elrond formed a clique and treated me as nothing because you hold the 3 rings." Gandalf shook his head and sighed. "Saruman, your heart is blinded by vanity and ambition. I have never sought to replace you or rule the world. My mission has always been to help the free peoples fight evil. I have not forgotten why we came here. I long for home." Saruman's eyes flickered with turmoil, then hardened. "Your words mean nothing. Even that fool Radagast has secret motives. How could you be so selfless?" Gandalf opened his mouth to answer, but Dewey cut in. He couldn't bear the posturing any longer. "Gandalf, why waste words? He's been corrupted by Sauron. We lured him out. Finish him." "Those who have fallen cannot be redeemed," Elrond's voice came from above. He stood astride the back of the great eagle Thorondor, a stern sword in his hand. Behind him, Smaug the dragon flew in, with Lady Galadriel poised on his flank. In moments, the dragon and the eagle touched down. Elrond, Galadriel, Smaug, and Thorondor encircled Saruman. "Dewey," Elrond called. Dewey's face lit up. With a dragon and an eagle as allies, the odds were overwhelming. Galadriel smiled gently at him. "Thank you for holding him." Dewey waved modestly. "There was a hiccup, but it was nothing." Gandalf turned to Elrond. "How did it go at Isengard?" Elrond nodded. "The Ents breached Isengard, routed the warg packs, and the enhanced orcs. With Smaug and Thorondor's help, Galadriel and I entered Orthanc, sealed it, and put it under the Ents' guard." He produced a palantir, its surface clouded with a malevolent sheen, and held it up toward Saruman. "Do you recognize this stone? We found it in your Chamber of Secrets, along with the wargs and orcs you bred and the blueprints for a ring of power you've been researching. What do you say to that?" Saruman's face fell. His treachery was exposed. He was wary, but words failed him. "When did you learn I betrayed you?" "Dewey foresaw your betrayal when you first made contact with Sauron, but we had no proof then," Galadriel said, disappointment in her deep, beautiful eyes. "We hoped you would turn back. In the end, you let us down. So you knew all along and were gathering evidence?" Saruman's resentment sharpened as he glared at Dewey. "I never expected you to foresee things. My plans failed because of you. Was this whole thing your plan, to use this brat as bait to draw me from Orthanc and cut off my retreat?" Saruman demanded. Dewey shook his head with a playful smile. "Nope, but I won't tell you. Villains always die for talking too much." As Saruman blinked, Dewey barked an order. "Smaug, attack!" Then, furious at the close calls Saruman had forced him through, Dewey cast a killing curse of his own. What Saruman did not know was that Dewey had felt eyes on him ever since passing Isengard. The feeling only abated when he reached the White Mountains. At first, he suspected Sauron. Then he realized someone else had been using a palantir to spy on him. When lightning struck at him from afar, he understood that Saruman had been watching and hunting him. Dewey had sent a Patronus to summon Gandalf and Elrond, and that set the rescue in motion. Smaug unleashed a blast of searing fire. The dragonfire forced Saruman to raise his staff in defense as he guarded against the encircling attackers. Saruman's will to fight was waning. He was looking for any chance to escape. The others surged. Elrond closed for direct combat. His long elven blade intercepted magical attacks and shattered incoming fire with clean, precise strikes. Saruman, Gandalf thundered, unleashing a shock of force from his staff. "Surrender! If you lay down your weapon, we will not strike you further." "Surrender? Never!" Saruman snarled and retaliated. The gem on his staff flared, sending a pillar of blinding light skyward. He intoned an ancient spell and the heavens darkened. Thunderclouds churned as if disturbed by a giant scoop. Then the sky seemed to pour down lightning, countless bolts like a storm's judgment aimed straight at the group. Dewey's face went pale. Saruman's power exceeded even his expectations. Even Elrond and Gandalf looked grave, and Thorondor and Smaug shuddered at the sheer divine force of the lightning. If struck, they felt, they would be grievously wounded or worse. Galadriel stepped forward. She raised her right hand as if holding up the sky. Nenya, the ring of water, appeared on her finger and bathed her hand in soft radiance. A vast, translucent shield blossomed out from her palm, a shimmering film that encompassed everyone: Galadriel, Dewey, Gandalf, Elrond, Smaug, and Thorondor. Lightning hammered into the shield like a hail of arrows, each strike setting off thunderous explosions against its surface. The thunder Saruman summoned was like apocalypse lightning. Boulders shattered, trees ignited, and the surrounding land turned into a scorched wasteland. This terrifying spectacle was the product of Saruman, the White Wizard, unleashing his power. Dewey, watching from within the protective barrier, flinched. Fortunately, Saruman's initial aim had been to capture him, and he had held back. Had he used everything at once, they would likely have been finished. Even so, Saruman's storm was subdued before Galadriel. The most powerful elf in Middle-earth raised the power of her ring of water and erected a vast, thin wall of water that took countless lightning bolts easily. Like a saying put to life, "Let the winds blow from every direction. I shall stand firm." Saruman stared at the shining ring in Galadriel's hand with a look of dread and envy. His collusion with Sauron had been driven by a single aim: to learn the ring-forging arts and craft a ring equal to or greater than the three, even rivaling the One Ring. Of the 5 Istari, he had been the only one to actively descend into Middle-earth to aid its peoples against Sauron. Yet when Círdan the Shipwright handed Nerya, the Ring of Fire, to Gandalf instead of him, Saruman felt deep jealousy and injustice. Later, when Galadriel convened the White Council and proposed Gandalf as leader, Gandalf had refused and recommended Saruman, an apparent favor Saruman took not as gratitude but as hypocrisy. Seeing Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond bound by their 3 elven rings, close allies and companions, only isolated Saruman further. His resentment grew until betrayal felt inevitable. His turn to Sauron was not a single temptation, but the result of long brewing bitterness. Without Sauron's seduction, the rift within the White Council would likely have grown all the same. "Saruman, your Isengard is breached. You have nowhere to run. Lay down your arms and accept judgment," Elrond intoned. Elrond had called upon Vilya, his Ring of Air, to stir the weather and begin dispersing the thunderclouds. Gandalf had likewise lent Narya's power, strengthening the wills of his companions while sapping Saruman's courage. For the first time in history, the 3 rings of the elves were united to confront Saruman. He sneered in return. "Humph, you have the 3 rings, but I will not be outdone." Saruman produced a golden ring from within his robe and slid it onto his finger. At first glance, it looked like the One Ring, so close that Dewey and Gandalf nearly believed Saruman possessed it. Then they remembered. The One Ring was in Tom Bombadil's care, well guarded. Gandalf checked on it regularly to ensure it remained safe. Still, the sight unsettled them. With the golden ring on his finger, Saruman's aura swelled. The scattered thunderclouds were formed into a vaster, darker storm. The sky blackened, thick clouds swallowed the sun, and the land for miles took on a sullen gloom. From a great distance, the thunderstorm could be seen and feared. "This is my masterpiece," Saruman proclaimed, flaunting the ring. "Forged by all my art, it rivals your 3 rings. Indeed, it surpasses them. You could all unite, and you would not touch me." Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel tightened their resolve. The 3 rings had been made not for dominion, but for preservation, understanding, and healing. They had not sought ultimate force. Saruman, by contrast, had cast aside those aims and pursued raw power. His new ring manifested that ambition, and its might rivaled, even outshone, the 3. He activated it, and a searing wave of magic blasted toward the group as lightning rained from the sky, intent on reducing them to ash. Galadriel's water barrier, though battered by the assault, held, but it began to shrink under the onslaught. Gandalf raised a shield of flame by channeling Narya, resisting beside her. Elrond and Dewey moved to attack. Elrond cleaved the magical shock with his elven blade and charged for close combat. Dewey used apparition to flash around Saruman, striking and distracting, coordinating with Elrond. Saruman, however, was no frail old man in battle. He moved with deceptive speed and guarded deftly with his staff, parrying Elrond and warding off Dewey's strikes. Even in defense, the staff's head sent out repelling shockwaves. "Bombarda!" Dewey apparated behind Saruman and hurled a blast. At the same moment, Elrond lunged, his blade slashing. For an instant, Saruman was assailed from front and back. If he blocked Elrond, the back would be open to Dewey. If he turned, Elrond would strike him down, yet Saruman would not accept defeat. The golden ring flared and wrapped him in a shield of flame, absorbing both attacks. "You waste your efforts. I am Saruman the White. No one defeats me," he cried, and the flame shield burst outward toward Elrond and Dewey. At that instant, Smaug lunged. The dragon's jaws closed over Saruman and his shield. He crushed the barrier and spewed scorching flame into the wizard's face. Bitten or burned, it seemed Saruman's end had come. For a breath, Smaug had him trapped. "You seek death," Saruman roared. He slammed his staff as a brace between the dragon's jaws, forcing them apart, and unleashed a bolt of lightning into the cavern of Smaug's mouth. The lightning detonated inside the dragon. Smaug gave a terrible cry and staggered, his combat strength sapped. Saruman tumbled free, singed and disheveled, beard, hair, and robe scorched, but alive. "Smaug," Dewey called, concern flashing across his features. There was no time to spare. He apparated behind Saruman and poured all his malice into a dark curse. "Crucio!" he shouted. Saruman managed a ward, but Crucio was not mere destruction, it was torment of mind and body. The curse struck through the staff's defenses and gripped him, and Saruman howled in pain. Yet his will was iron. Even under torture, he kept his mind and activated a dazzling countershock that hurled Dewey and Elrond backward. He controlled 2 bolts of lightning to strike them as well. Dewey twisted with apparition to avoid the flash and reappeared beside Elrond a heartbeat later, hauling him back inside Galadriel's water ring alongside Gandalf. "With that ring, he is stronger than any of us," Elrond said gravely. "We must first disperse the dark clouds, deny him the storm that feeds his lightning." Galadriel agreed. "Elrond, your ring of air can control the weather. Break the thunderclouds. I will hold the line and shield you while you work." "I will lend you my strength," Gandalf added, channeling Narya into Elrond to bolster his will. Dewey, panting, said, "I'll keep him busy," and once more flitted about in a blur of apparition. Elrond lifted his left hand, the ring of air upon it, and intoned an ancient Quenya chant. His voice rang deep and strange across land and sky. The air answered. Wind rose, building into a roaring vortex that grew into a tornado. Its howl swallowed other sounds. Boulders lifted, and trees were torn from their roots. Dewey and the others, safe within Galadriel's barrier, were buffeted but not torn away. Their robes snapped in the gale, and tears of dust stung their eyes. Saruman, standing beyond the barrier, set his staff into the earth with both hands and planted his feet as if rooted. For a moment, he appeared trapped in the eye of the maelstrom, at the mercy of being swept away. The tornado swelled like a great dragon leaping into the sky, ripping through cloud and storm. It reached up, grabbed the surrounding thunderheads, and drew them into itself. Within its vortex, the clouds flashed with trapped lightning. In time, the great funnel had sucked the sky clean. every dark cloud swallowed. Blue sky returned, the sun shone once more across the land, and the tornado, like a pillar between earth and heaven, disintegrated into dust. The rocks and trees it had carried were ground to powder, scattering across the earth like ashes. Stripped of thunderclouds and lightning, Saruman no longer had the storm to back him. Galadriel and Gandalf freed their hands and joined Elrond and Dewey in the attack. "Saruman," Galadriel said, her voice cool and commanding, her silver-gold hair haloed by sunlight, "you can no longer resist. Surrender." 203. Defeated and fleeing, surrender? Saruman sneered at Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf, and Dewey. Mockery filled his deep, gloomy eyes. "You expect me to surrender?" A bewitching power, born of his Maya essence, flowed from him. His gaze carried suggestion, his voice threaded with enchantment. "Please, lay down your hostility, my friends. I am not your enemy. This is only a misunderstanding. This world needs order. I'm simply making it better." Dewey staggered as the words washed over him. Suddenly, Saruman's figure swelled in his mind, his hostility ebbing away. The voice slid into thoughts like a gentle current, urging obedience. Dewey fought to resist, using the last of his will to cast a spell against telepathic suggestion, but it was useless. Saruman's voice did not act through the ears alone. Invisible spiritual power invaded their minds, attempting to twist their wills and thoughts. Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond all frowned. Saruman's speech had become a weapon, not mere words, but a weaving of charm and compulsion that assaulted the mind. "Do not listen to him," Gandalf thundered into Dewey's head. "His voice threads shadows. Break it." Elrond, concentrating, warned aloud and began to guard his own mind. Saruman's voice could not fully corrupt the wills of such strong minds, but it became an incessant interference, like static, that kept them from focusing. Worse, it overtook the spiritual wills of Dragon Smaug and the giant eagle Thorondor, turning them hostile toward Gandalf and the others. By the terms of Dewey's master magic contract, Smaug could not attack Dewey, so Dewey himself was safe. But the sudden, internal conflict threw the whole clash into chaos. Gandalf and Elrond, mindful that Smaug and Thorondor were Dewey's creatures, dared not use lethal force and were forced onto the defensive. Galadriel concentrated on a barrier to blunt Saruman's demonic harmonies while holding the beasts at bay. Dewey's head throbbed. He began to play the music magic Tom had taught him, bright, lively chords that pushed against Saruman's cruel sound. For a moment the cheerful notes helped, but Saruman's enchantment was strong. Dewey's music began to falter. Then Galadriel and the others acted. Gandalf poured the power of his ring of fire into Dewey, strengthening his spiritual core. Galadriel and Elrond likewise fed him their ring power. The single melody swelled into a golden symphony. Golden notes blossomed over the plain, filled with warmth and joy. The cheerful music rose like sunlight and began to smother Saruman's demonic voice, neutralizing its compulsion. Smaug and Thorondor, shaken free of the spell, halted their assault and recovered themselves. For Saruman, the sudden flood of jubilant music was a grating roar. He clapped his hands over his ears and cried, "Enough! Stop this noise!" Beaten back, Saruman decided to flee. He murmured a dark curse over the corpse of his warg. The beast's body soured and twisted with shadow, rising as something ugly and reeking of dark power. He mounted the reanimated warg and turned east, unable to return to Isengard. Now lost, he aimed for Mordor, or perhaps even farther east. "Pursue!" Gandalf called, and sprung onto a flying broom. Elrond and Galadriel took to Thorondor and Smaug. Dewey apparated, flashing in and out of Saruman's path, casting spells and harrying him. Flight gave them the advantage. Soon the pursuers closed in and began to surround Saruman from the air. Saruman, furious, lashed out with lightning and fire as he fled. He raised a storm to blunt their aerial advantage. The chase tore across the plains of Rohan. Galadriel shielded the others, while Dewey, Gandalf, and Elrond struck whenever they could. Dewey, knowing his power was the weakest, avoided a head-on fight. He apparated about Saruman, distracting and slowing him. Elrond handled close quarters. Gandalf met Saruman's magic with his staff. Lightning and fire braided across the sky. Explosions shook the land. When they reached the Entwash, Elrond called up the river. Water surged from upstream and became a barrier that cut off Saruman's path. "You have nowhere to run." Gandalf's voice rolled like thunder as a bolt of lightning leapt at Saruman. Saruman countered. Their bolts collided in a blinding burst of sparks that stung the eyes. Dewey apparated behind Saruman and cast Expelliarmus. A powerful backlash struck Saruman's hand. His staff flew from his grasp. With a second quick apparition, Dewey snatched the staff and fell back. Staffless, Saruman's threat diminished significantly. Gandalf followed with a shockwave that hurled Saruman into the Ontwash, and Elrond bent the river into a massive whirlpool to hold him fast, spinning him dizzy and leaving him unable to struggle free. "Saruman, you have lost," Gandalf said. "Surrender. We were once allies. We will not slay you. We shall imprison you. If you truly repent, perhaps one day you may find forgiveness and return to the West." Saruman thrashed in the water, a sneer etched on his face. "I am not wrong. I only sought power. What is wrong with seeking power? The age of the Valar is over. Why should we remain servants in the West because they were made greater than us? I mean to remain in this world, to rule it." Gandalf's face darkened. He had hoped Saruman's fall was the work of Sauron alone. These words revealed a deeper resentment of the Valar, a rebellious hunger that echoed Morgoth and Sauron, an ambition to overthrow the gods and seize rule. Dewey listened and felt a new understanding of Saruman. He was not merely corrupted, he resented his place in the hierarchy of the world. Yet that did not soften Dewey's dislike. "Don't waste words on him," Dewey said. "To be safe, let's finish him." He lifted his staff, preparing to end Saruman while the others watched. Saruman, still floating in the river, only smiled in contempt. "I see your hunger too," he spat. "When you fall, you will turn on your friends. I look forward to it." The others glanced at Dewey with concern, wary that Saruman was trying to poison him. Dewey gave no sign of wavering. He answered coldly, "Yes, I seek power, but only to protect myself and those I care for. I have no desire to rule the world. For me, light and darkness are like day and night in Arda. Both exist and neither can be wholly cast away." Saruman stared, baffled by such resolve. In his view, the pursuit of power inevitably led to domination. Whoever wanted strength must want rule. Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond exchanged looks of admiration and surprise. Only now did they truly understand Dewey's aim. Dewey wasted no more words. He cast again, Expelliarmus. The spell struck. The ring on Saruman's finger slipped free and flew through the air toward the shore. Saruman howled and reached for it in fury, but Dewey did not give it back. He apparated forward, picked up the golden ring with his wand, and examined it carefully. An instrument of power whose force was in no way less than the 3 elven rings. Dewey had been curious about the ring of power Saruman had forged, but he had feared, rightly, that it might corrupt hearts as the One Ring did. He would not touch it. Without his staff and ring, Saruman was a diminished threat, like a tiger stripped of tooth and claw, but still dangerous. Dewey had wanted to kill him outright. Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond would not hear of it. They had been comrades of Saruman for ages. Despite his betrayal and collusion with Sauron, they still hoped he might repent. More than sentiment, there was principle. Saruman had once been the lone Maya among the 5 wizards to come to Middle-earth to aid its peoples. He had earned the right to judgment. The Valar, they said, should decide his fate. Dewey did not insist on sentencing Saruman himself, but he was determined the traitor should not escape. He proposed strong bonds to prevent flight. This time, Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel agreed. Even without staff and ring, Saruman remained a powerful wizard. Elrond drew Saruman from the river with a spell, and together with Gandalf and Galadriel, wove the power of the 3 elven rings into a triple, unbreakable cage. Saruman made no resistance. He sat sullen and silent as the bonds closed about him. They prepared to take him back to Isengard when Galadriel's face hardened. Her gaze cut sharply to the east. Gandalf and Elrond looked there as well, and even Saruman in his cage turned his dead eyes that way. Dewey followed their sight and saw the eastern horizon shrouded by a spreading curtain of black clouds, rolling toward them like a living thing. "Be ready," Gandalf said, drawing his sword and foe hammer, his voice tight. Elrond seized his elven blade and moved to Galadriel's side, his expression grave. The clouds swept across the sky, and beneath them, 9 hideous shapes flew, smaller than dragons, swathed in black mist, with great membrane wings like bats. Atop those monstrous mounts sat 9 figures in dark armor, the Nazgul, wielding cold, cruel blades and exuding an ancient, hateful presence. The fell beasts and their riders advanced to cross the Untwash. Galadriel lifted a hand, and a pure, dazzling light burst from her. The black cloud halted where her radiance met it. The fell beasts shrieked and circled uneasily, their riders kept at bay. For a moment, the river divided day and night. Nazgul, servants of Sauron, Galadriel's voice rang like thunder. This is no place for you. Return to your shadow. They lingered, drawn and yet fearful. From the Witch King's hollow helm came a voice like the rasp of years, an old and terrible speech from the dark tongue. We only want the White Wizard. Hand him over. Never, Gandalf snorted, riding his broom, sword in one hand, staff in the other. With me here, you shall not cross this river. The Witch King's laugh was a black thing. Grey Wizard, you cannot bar our way. Something in his tone was more than a taunt. It was a promise. Elrond stepped forward and began a spell. The Untwash rose, a wall of water surging up between them and the Nazgul. Dewey cast his own ward. He called his Patronus, an owl whose wings flashed with silver, and sent it at the riders. The spectral owl's claws raked at the Nazgul. Its bright, holy nature caused even those soulless things to tremble. The Witch King, however, raised a pale, clawed hand and loosed dark power. It congealed into a giant black bat of shadow that met Dewey's owl and fought it, an obscene mirror, a dark Patronus born of malice. Gandalf's eyes narrowed as he saw the Nazgul's hands. They wear rings, he warned. All at once they saw the glitter on those black-gloved fingers, golden circlets set with dull gems, each emitting a faint, sickly glow. The 9 rings of men, forged by Celebrimbor and corrupted by Sauron, were on the Nazgul once more. No longer merely servants animated by fear, they were strengthened. The rings had amplified their power. A mental blow hit Elrond like a physical one. The spatial pouch at his hip, an unassuming leather thing Dewey had once given him for convenience, shuddered as if struck by ice. Elrond flung it away. Space itself burst out of the pouch. It tore open, and the things within tumbled free. A palantir rolled out and stopped on the grass. Within its dark glass, a single red vertical eye swelled to fill the globe, burning with a will that clawed at them. Sauron. They tightened like one body. The eye looked over each of them, and then lingered on Dewey, as if tasting a new curiosity. The voice that issued was not Saruman's clumsy malice, but something old, vast, persuasive. Why do you oppose me? Your time is passing, elves. The world will belong to men. Lothlorien will fade, Rivendell will dim, the elves will grow thin and leave this land. Stand aside and watch. Refuse the struggle, and your age will not end. You shall keep your realms. You shall live in peace and remember your former glory. Sauron laid his bait for Galadriel and Elrond, but their minds were steel. Galadriel turned to the palantir, light gathering in her like sunrise, her silver-gold hair a halo of the two trees' memory. Her eyes, hard as stars, met Sauron's within the crystal. The eye flinched from that counter-glare, shriveling under her radiance. Sauron, servant of Morgoth, she said, cold as winter, your words are honeyed poison. You will deceive no one here. Struck and scorched by her light, the eye fled the stone. The strain left Galadriel trembling. She swayed, pale with the effort. Elrond moved to her, concern plain on his face. She smiled, weak but resolute, and placed her grace upon the palantir, sealing it so that the dark voice could not readily return. They breathed briefly, then the ground underfoot shuddered. Before any of them could act, a great maw split the earth. Rows of monstrous teeth, a throat like a pit, and a vast landworm surged up. It was enormous, a thing of legend and hunger. Dewey acted fast. He apparated Galadriel and Elrond clear of the collapse, then cast further apparitions to fling others to safety. Gandalf flung himself up on his broom. Smaug and Thorondor burst into the air. Saruman, however, was slow. The landworm snapped its enormous jaws and swallowed him whole in a single gulp, then vanished down into the earth. Where it had risen, there yawned a black, bottomless hole. They stood at the edge of that abyss and stared. None believed Saruman was dead. Sauron had arranged this. The Nazgul had been a feint to draw their attention east. Sauron's eye had taunted them in the palantir. Then the landworm had risen underfoot and spirited Saruman away. To do all this for a mere killing would be needless cruelty. It reeked instead of rescue. They considered pursuit. The worm's domain was under the earth, in tunnels and caverns where tunnels could collapse and paths lead to traps. The hole was deep and silent. The Nazgul, their mission complete, no longer hovered. Mounted on their fell beasts, they turned and flew eastward toward Mordor, the black clouds peeling away after them and light returning to the sky. Dewey and the others watched the riders go. To follow the Nazgul was folly. As long as Sauron still drew breath, they could slay the ringwraiths over and over, and still they would return. It was a waste of strength. They had been outmaneuvered today. The trick had worked, and Saruman had been taken beyond their reach. 205. Saruman's Stronghold. Sauron's rescue of Saruman struck Dewey and the others like a blow. Sauron alone was terrifying. With Saruman now at his side, the threat multiplied. Mordor had always been Sauron's base, swollen with foul creatures and corrupted men. Even Gandalf had never dared to penetrate its depths. The lands to the east had long fallen under Sauron's sway. Many eastern and southern tribes answered him. Now, adding Saruman, a mighty wizard versed in engineering and machinecraft, a corrupter and modifier of creatures, made Sauron feel like a tiger with wings. There was one small relief. Dewey had taken Saruman's staff and a mysterious ring, depriving him of two of his greatest personal instruments. They had also wrested control of Isengard before Saruman and Sauron could turn it into a springboard to swallow Rohan and Gondor. As Dewey and Gandalf prepared to ride for Isengard, the sound of hooves came echoing over the plains. 1,000 elite horsemen charged in, dust rolling in their wake. Smaug stood between them and Dewey's party, and his size and presence unsettled the horses. They would not come closer than 100 meters, except for the leader's mount, a tall, powerful steed that carried its rider nearer than the others dared. Gandalf brightened at the newcomer and rode forward. "King Thengel, all is well, I trust?" The rider removed his helmet. He was a rugged, dignified man in middle age. His gaze flicked first to the dragon with a mixture of awe, then to Galadriel and Elrond. Realizing at once that they were elves, he looked next at Dewey, and for a moment had the notion the young man might be an elf too, until the doubt registered on his face. Turning to Gandalf with concern, he took in the churned earth and the scarred riverbank. "What has happened here?" he asked. "My scouts reported enemy activity, yet I find only you." Gandalf's face grew grave. "Something terrible has happened. I regret to say that Saruman of Isengard has betrayed us. He conspired with Mordor, planning assaults upon Rohan and Gondor. We uncovered his treachery and tried to apprehend him, but Mordor's forces intervened and carried him away." Thengel's astonishment was open and immediate. Saruman, the White Wizard, he would not collude with Mordor? "He has been rescued by Mordor," Gandalf confirmed. "With Saruman's craft and Mordor's might combined, their power will grow. Be watchful, strengthen watch along your eastern borders, and prepare for an invasion. Send word south to the Steward of Gondor so he may ready his defenses as well." Thengel's demeanor hardened at the news. "I will send troops to guard the Anduin and increase our ties with Gondor." He bowed his head in grave agreement. Though recently come to his throne, the king was vigorous and not the sort to ignore a threat to his people. Gandalf introduced the others. "This is Galadriel, Lady of Lothlorien," he said. Galadriel inclined her head with the serene dignity of the Eldar. Thengel was struck dumb by her beauty and nobility. Those deep, bright eyes made his own feel small, and he found himself quickly averting his gaze. "And this is Lord Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, master of the last homely house." Elrond nodded courteously. Though he was king of men, Thengel treated him with respect. Gandalf then gestured to Dewey. "This is the black-robed wizard Dewyer, Lord of Weathertop, of Hogsmeade and Bree, and the Master of Dragons." Thengel looked surprised. He had heard tales of the Battle of 5 Armies and of strange new wizards, but he had imagined any black-robed wizard as an old man. That one so young could command a dragon astonished him. Grateful for the presence of so many worthy allies, Thengel invited them all to Adoras, but Galadriel and Elrond declined. There were matters to attend to that would not wait on diplomacy. Dewey and Gandalf likewise excused themselves. After a courteous farewell, the company departed, some riding Smaug, others on great eagles, and Thengel watched them leave with his Rohirrim in awe. They reached Isengard soon after. Nestled at the southern edge of the Misty Mountains, Isengard occupied the strategic choke point between north and south. A ring of outer walls cradled a courtyard, while the black tower of Orthanc rose like a spear at its heart. Whoever held Isengard could threaten Rohan and distract Gondor. Saruman's choice of that place as his stronghold had always been ominous. The courtyard had been taken over by Ents. The Ents and Horns had torn down the outer walls and subdued Saruman's men. To arm his ambitions, Saruman had raised Uruk-hai and recruited nearly 1,000 human allies, Rohirrim, Gondorians, and Dunlendings among them. Now they were prisoners, held in cages woven of living roots. "Thank you for your help, Treebeard," Gandalf said. Treebeard's slow voice rumbled like a distant boulder falling. "We would not see the forest felled," he said. "Saruman was cutting our trees for his forges. We acted." After entrusting the prisoners to Gandalf's care, the Ents and Huorns returned to Fangorn, leaving the captives under the watch of Smaug's guardianship. Dewey and the others entered Orthanc. Orthanc, forged by the Númenóreans and hardened through ages of Saruman's tampering, was a fortress in itself. Saruman had reforged it into a tower that served both as a stronghold and a vast focus of power. Runes and enchantments lay over its stones, bolstering its resistance and amplifying whatever craft the wizard within set to work. No wonder previous hopes of storming it had seemed vain. The lower levels held cells, stores, and an armory. Above them, laboratories hummed with strange contraptions. Dewey wandered through rooms of glass tubes, powders, and crude engines, crossbows modified by strange gears, early forms of gunpowder, mechanical designs that made him mutter in admiration. Saruman was a fanatic experimenter. It was a tragedy that so much talent had bent toward ruin. The library seized Dewey's attention. A whole floor had been given over to bookshelves, packed with scrolls, tomes, and manuscripts. Outside Rivendell, he had never seen so many books in one place. He longed to delve in, but first he took from his satchel the 2 trophies he had taken from Saruman, the staff and the ring. Dewey had no wish to keep the staff. He handed it to Gandalf, who accepted it without protest. The ring was different. Woven under Sauron's influence, it might conceal corruption like the rings of men or dwarves. Dewey set it on the table without touching it. He had no desire to invite temptation or risk. Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel agreed. If there were a trap, if the ring carried influence, none of them wished Dewey or anyone to slip unawares into its snare. They examined it with every method at their disposal, cautious and meticulous. Despite tests that found nothing overtly malign, Galadriel elected to try it herself, to feel with her own spirit whether any shadow lingered about it. She slipped the ring upon her finger and sat a long moment. When she removed it, she smiled faintly and offered it to Dewey. "It bears no evil touch," she said. "Use it well." Relieved and heartened, Dewey slid the ring onto his finger. 206, Lord of Isengard. When Dewey slid Saruman's power ring onto his finger, the difference hit him at once. Pleasant surprise filled his eyes. This ring was not like the 3 elven rings. There were no protections of water, no healing of air, no understanding of fire. It did one thing. It amplified the wearer. The moment it closed around his finger, Dewey felt his magic, his spirit, every attribute swell several-fold. He felt terrifyingly strong, capable of overwhelming several former versions of himself. He could cast without a wand or staff, and the raw power of those castings exceeded what he could produce even with a wand. Elation flooded him. He had always envied Gandalf and the others for their rings. He had never expected to possess a ring of power himself. Still, his joy was tempered by a twinge of regret. Saruman's ring could rival the elven rings in sheer boost, but it lacked their refinement. The elven rings did more than enhance strength. They slowed the passage of time, offered protection, healing, and inspiration, and were bound to the elements so those forces could be guided. Saruman had clearly tried to imitate the One Ring, but he had aimed too high and settled short. He had drawn a tiger and ended up with a dog. The result was a clever version of the One Ring whose power could not match the original. Worse, Saruman had fashioned the ring for himself. He had not considered whether others could use it. So while it let Dewey cast mightier spells unaided, each use laid a grave physical strain on him. After a while, he had to remove it. He conjured a transfiguration charm, threaded the ring onto a necklace, and hung it about his neck. The inner band was inscribed in Elvish Tengwar, "Energy to my body, power to the extraordinary, might without end." It was unmistakable, Saruman's attempt to reproduce something like the One Ring, only crudely done. At that moment, the system pinged. "Hogwarts check-in system, located Isengard, Orthanc. Do you wish to check in?" Dewey confirmed. Check-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the method for crossbreeding magical creatures. Crossbreeding magical creatures. Dewey frowned, then skimmed the entry. The method was astonishing. Magical hybridization ignored ordinary reproductive boundaries. Species that would never mix in nature could be combined by magical means. Hagrid had once crossbred a manticore and a fire crab to produce the blast-ended Scroot, a hulking, shelled monstrosity that spat flames and explosives from its tail and possessed a volatile, dangerous temperament. The hippogriff of the Forbidden Forest was itself a hybrid, a cross between a griffon and a horse. The Chimera, counted among the Ministry's deadliest monsters, was a product of such crossbreeding as well. A lion's head, a goat's body, and a dragon's tail, capable of terrifying ferocity. Newt Scamander's Fantastic Beasts warned that many wizards had perished trying to tame such creations. Because hybrids were either dangerously powerful or abnormally weak and often utterly uncontrollable, the Ministry strictly forbade magical crossbreeding. Dewey set the file aside. He could not immediately see how to use the method, and the risks were obvious. With the ring and system matter settled, attention turned back to Orthanc. Saruman had built the tower into an almost impervious stronghold. If he hadn't been lured out, they would not have been confident of breaching it even together. Now Saruman had fled and Orthanc stood vacant. No one wanted to destroy it. Its value as an indestructible refuge was too great. More importantly, Isengard occupied a strategic pass between the Misty and White Mountains, a hub linking western Eriador with Rohan, Gondor, and even Mordor. From there, one could control the Great North-South Road and the routes to the plains of Rohan. Whoever held Isengard could sever or maintain vital lines of communication across the west. Elrond and Galadriel both declined to assume responsibility. They had their own realms to govern and could not spare the oversight. Dewey smiled and said in jest, "Besides the three of you, Gandalf, we all have our own lands to look after. And you, Gandalf, have no fixed home. Why not watch over this place? You could have a territory, stay near Rohan and Gondor, and keep an eye on Mordor." Elrond and Galadriel agreed. Elrond added, "Saruman will not give up Isengard easily. He will try to retake it. We must have someone here who can deal with him." Gandalf shook his head, laughing as he refused. "I am not so old that I need a permanent home. I like to wander, to meet people and see the world. A territory would tie my feet. My role is to guide the free peoples, to go where there is crisis. A fixed stronghold would hamper me, make me less able to move between allies and unite them." His friends knew him well and stopped persuading him. Their gazes then turned to Dewey. He looked puzzled for a moment, then understood, and immediately waved them off. "Don't look at me," he said. "I already have Weathertop. Isengard is 1,000 miles away. I can't manage both. I can't even keep tabs on Hogsmeade and Bree at the foot of Weathertop. I really don't want to be running back and forth." Gandalf only smiled. "Distance is no problem for you, Dewey. Set up a flu network between Weathertop and Orthanc, and you can be here whenever you like. Lady Galadriel and Lord Elrond cannot stay, and I must roam. You're the only one with the ability to guard Isengard. Don't refuse." Still, Dewey shook his head. He suggested Gandalf delegate the duty to someone he knew. Gandalf sighed. "You underestimate the importance of Isengard. It is a gateway between East and West. If Saruman or Mordor seized it, they could cut off communications, isolate Rohan and Gondor, and leave the West vulnerable. The armies of Mordor could move in and threaten all of Eriador. This place needs someone trustworthy and capable to hold it." Elrond and Galadriel agreed. Then Gandalf pressed his final advantage. "Dewey, if you take Isengard, everything Saruman left behind will be yours, especially his books and scrolls. Think of the libraries." That was the clincher. Dewey's eyes went to the thought of Saruman's amassed tomes, the knowledge and lore collected over centuries, and temptation won. "Deal," he said, abandoning his protests. He had already taken Saruman's staff and ring. Taking the tower itself now felt only natural. The three smiled, unsurprised. So, in addition to Weathertop, Dewey accepted Isengard as his territory. He then recalled the Black Barbarian Shrine and produced the copied diagram of the magic array he had destroyed there, handing it to Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf. All three studied it, their expressions darkening. "Where did you find this array?" Elrond asked. Dewey explained the encounter at the shrine in detail. When he finished, they looked even more grave. Elrond's face showed a mixture of relief and revulsion. "Fortunately, you destroyed it in time," he said. "Had it remained, something far worse might have been unleashed." Dewey asked if Elrond recognized the pattern. Elrond nodded, voice heavy with disgust. "This is an ancient and evil sacrificial array. It traces back to the Druidine, who once fell under Morgoth's sway. They revered him so fanatically, they offered life and blood to him. After Morgoth's fall, such rites faded, and I never expected one to linger in the Black Barbarian Shrine." 207. Soul Reaper. Dewey was slightly puzzled when he heard this. If Morgoth has already been defeated, shouldn't this magic array be useless? Gandalf shook his head and answered earnestly. "You said yourself he was only defeated. After the War of Wrath, Morgoth was captured. The Valar bound him with the chain Enginor and banished him into the void beyond the world. But in this world, many still follow and worship him. Through sacrifices and other rites, they try to give him strength so that he might break free and return." Galadriel took the blueprint, frowned at the evil formation depicted on it, and said slowly, "There is an old prophecy that Morgoth will at last break his bonds and come back, bringing a war far crueler than before. I used to think it was mere rumor, but now I see the omens were there all along." Gandalf broke the heavy silence with a lighter tone. "Prophecy or no prophecy, it's too far off to fret over now. Besides, Dewey has already destroyed and erased that formation, so nobody can use it." They agreed to set the matter aside. Dewey burned the blueprint of the sacrificial array, then cast a spell on the fireplace in Orthanc to link it to the Floo network, making trips between Weathertop and Isengard convenient. Galadriel and Elrond declined Dewey's invitation to stay and used the fireplace to return to Lothlorien and Rivendell. Only Dewey and Gandalf remained. Orthanc was a formidable fortress, the result of Saruman's centuries of work, filled with wards, mechanisms, and cunning spells. Those defenses could repel intruders, but they offered no protection against their creator. Destroying it outright would be a terrible waste, yet if Saruman returned, it could easily become a powerful weapon in his hands. In the end, Dewey and Gandalf chose to strip and rework the rites and devices Saruman had left, converting them so that the tower could not be turned back against them. It took the two of them a month of careful work to make Orthanc their own. Dewey carved runes into the stone and laid new enchantments, further strengthening the tower. During that month, Dewey also dealt with Saruman's followers. Apart from some Gondorians and Rohirrim, most of Saruman's human recruits were the black wildlings of Dunland. The Gondorians and Rohirrim were easily handed over to the soldiers of Gondor and Rohan stationed near the fords of Isen, but the black wildlings were more troublesome. They lived west of Isengard, separated from Rohan only by a mountain, and had been Saruman's allies against Rohan. Gandalf tried to soothe the grievances between the wildlings and the Rohirrim, even urging King Thengel to permit the wildlings to return to their lands, but the conflict ran too deep. The Dunlendings were the old inhabitants of the Isen Valley and Rohan's western border. Rohan's ancestors had migrated in later and been granted the land by Gondor. The Dunlendings believed the Rohirrim had encroached on their traditional lands, and disputes over pastures and fields had long turned violent. Eventually, the Rohirrim defeated them and drove many into what is now Dunland, hardening a lasting hatred. Saruman had only fanned these flames. Dewey did not want an unstable neighbor. If the wildlings resumed collaboration with Saruman, it would be a great danger. After conferring with Gandalf, he decided to meet their leader in person to announce the change of ownership at Isengard and to check the situation in Dunland. He released the black wildlings he had detained and let them carry a message. Dewey would come to Dunland in a month to meet their leader. Once Orthanc's hidden dangers had been neutralized, Dewey rode the dragon Smaug over the mountains toward Dunland. Dunland lies on the western slopes of the southern end of the Misty Mountains, a narrow region east of the north-south road and north of the Isen River, down to the River Gwathlo. The Dunlendings did not live in towns, but were scattered, nomads and smallholders across the hills. When Dewey and the Golden Dragon descended from the peaks, the Dunlendings looked up in terror and unease. Legends of dragons persisted, and few had seen one. Smaug skimmed the treetops, visible and terrifying but not attacking. After a single circuit, Smaug settled near the leader's encampment. Dewey's arrival was a deliberate show of force. These people respected power. To command them, one had to command awe. On a grassy plain beside the wood, a cluster of tents stood within a crude wooden palisade. It was the most populous camp in the region and the seat of the Dunlending leader. When the dragon landed, the camp erupted in panic. Men grabbed crude weapons they did not know how to use, and children screamed. The leader lived in the largest tent. He emerged, his pupils contracting when he saw the dragon, and for a moment he nearly ran back inside. But he was a chief and stifled his fear. Gripping his saber, he stepped forward and, trying to show strength for his people, shouted up at the rider, "I am Brog, leader here. What business does the Lord of Dragons have in Dunland?" Dewey vanished from Smaug's back and appeared in an instant before Brog. "I am Dewey, the black-robed wizard. I had your men bring a message. Chief Brog should know who I am." Brog started, almost drawing his sword, but forced himself to calm down. The man before him was taller than expected, and his presence commanded attention even without the dragon. With a cautious nod, he said, "Of course. You are the master of Isengard now, the Lord of Weathertop in the north, the Lord of Dragons, and the Bane of Orcs. Your name has spread across Middle-earth. We have heard of you even here." Dewey allowed himself a small smile. "Good. I don't need to say more, then. I have come to tell you that Saruman betrayed us by colluding with Mordor and has fled there. Isengard is now under my control. I heard you had dealings with Saruman. To avoid misunderstanding, I came in person to ask your position. Chief Brog, will you give me a clear answer?" Brog glanced at Dewey's casual smile, and the dragon looming behind him felt a chill run down his spine and hurried to explain. "It's a misunderstanding. We knew nothing of Saruman's plots with Mordor. We only worked with him because he promised to help us reclaim our lands. Now we know he betrayed everyone. We will not support him." Dewey neither confirmed nor doubted. He nodded and said softly, "I hope that is true. If not, the next visitor here will not be me, but my dragon." Smaug obliged by roaring, a sound that shook the camp and hinted at fire. Brog broke into a cold sweat and stammered his assurances again. "Absolutely. It will not happen. We swear it." At that moment, the system responded. "Hogwarts check-in system. Location Dunland confirmed." "Check-in?" Dewey's lips curved as he thought the command and answered in his mind, "Check-in." "Check-in successful. Congratulations on acquiring the legilimency talent." A strange clarity washed over Dewey, as if a hidden realm within him had opened. His spiritual power leaked out, and suddenly the thoughts, the inner voices of the Dunlendings, of Brog, even of Smaug, pressed into his mind like a clamor of many people shouting at once. The flood of impressions made him frown. "Master?" Smaug watched him with concern. Dewey shook his head and forced his power inward, trying to control the surge. The crown of wisdom he wore helped him adapt quickly. He learned to focus, to keep the noisy inner voices from overwhelming him. Brog saw Dewey's frown and grew uneasy, but still summoned the courage to speak. "Wizard Dewey, we Dunlendings once lived on our ancestral lands, herding, hunting, and farming in peace. Then those hateful Rohirrim took our lands, and the cunning men of Gondor enfeoffed the territory to them. We were driven from our homes to wander in Dunland. If you help us reclaim our lands, our tribe will serve you. We will swear fealty to you." With his new legilimency, Dewey could sense Brog's thoughts and emotions clearly, genuine longing and fierce hope. The other wildlings' minds were full of expectation and desire. Dewey felt a pang of helplessness. He did not wish to fan the feud between the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim. Historically, the Rohirrim's ancestors had indeed pushed into lands once held by the Dunlendings, but the Dunlendings had also raided Rohan repeatedly, even once taking Edoras and killing a prince of Rohan. Both sides had blood on their hands. Each had its grievances. Even Gandalf, ever the mediator, had struggled to judge or resolve the conflict. Dewey stood between people's old wounds, the weight of choices pressing on him, while the dragon's shadow lay across the trembling camp, and the thought voices of Dunland thrummed in his mind. 208. Magical hybrid Dewey refused the surrender terms offered by the Black Barbarians. He shook his head. "I will not help you fight the Rohirrim," he said. Disappointment flickered across the faces of the Black Barbarians. Rohan was stronger than their tribes. Without a powerful ally like Dewey, one who commanded a dragon, how could they ever reclaim the lands they had dreamed of for generations? Dewey continued, however, "If you are willing to let go of your hatred and live peacefully with the Rohirrim, Gandalf and I will do our best to persuade the King of Rohan to allow you to return to your ancestral lands." He did not want to become entangled in a war between the Black Barbarians and the Rohirrim, but he would not leave behind a festering danger. The Black Barbarians had long sought to regain their homeland. If they were left with no recourse, they might grow desperate and seek collusion with Saruman, or worse, with Mordor. Fortunately, Gandalf had already been trying to mediate between the two peoples. He had even traveled personally to Edoras to speak with the king. King Thengel was not inflexible, and under Gandalf's persuasion, he was willing to talk. Border harassment had long been a burden on Rohan. A settled peace would be to their advantage. Hope flared in the Black Barbarian leader's eyes, mingled with reluctance. In their view, the Rohirrim were usurpers who should be driven out, but none dared speak that to Dewey. His willingness to help was already a tremendous favor. Pressing for more might offend the Lord of Dragons. Dewey read the leader's thoughts easily with his legilimency, but he paid it no mind. He told them that if they agreed to negotiate peace, he and Gandalf would arrange a meeting with the Rohirrim and seek a plan acceptable to both sides. Dewey did not linger in Black Barbarian territory. He mounted his dragon and returned to Isengard. At Orthanc, he handed the matter over to Gandalf, who was eager to carry out the negotiations. Mounting his flying broomstick, Gandalf headed to Edoras to pursue peace talks with King Thengel. Left at Isengard, Dewey began to examine the books and scrolls Saruman had left behind. He frowned at what he found. Saruman had experimented with blending orcs and humans, trolls and orcs, trying to create stronger, sun-tolerant war beasts. Reading it reminded Dewey of the magical creature hybridization and cultivation method he had obtained through a sign-in reward. Isengard's strategic importance was immense. Its control of the passes between Rohan and Gondor meant that if it were taken, both kingdoms could be cut off and isolated. If Sauron's forces seized Isengard, Rohan and Gondor could be permanently cut off. Saruman, having lost his territory, would surely scheme to retake it. Dewey could not remain here forever, but he could not leave Isengard unguarded either. He had hoped Smaug would stay as a guardian, but Smaug only wanted to nest on his mountain of gold at Weathertop and sleep. Seeing no desire in the dragon to leave, Dewey abandoned the idea. Instead, he decided to use the hybridization method to produce guardians. He needed test subjects. He sent the giant eagle Thorondor and Smaug out to capture ferocious beasts. Thorondor returned with a male lion and a pack of wargs. Smaug, after considerable effort, brought back a tall, pure white wild horse from the Rohan plains. The horse was of the Mearas breed. Its bloodline traced back to Nahar, the Mount of Arom, and thus it was a descendant of the divine steeds. It did not fear Smaug's presence and was extremely fast, which made capturing it difficult. Under the resentful stares of Thorondor and Smaug, Dewey drew a vial of blood from each captive. He began his experiments. First, he tried to fuse giant eagle blood with the wild horses to create an embryo. In this world, there were no griffins, so he used the giant eagle as a substitute, hoping for a hippogriff-like result. He implanted the embryo into the mare. Nearly kicked during the procedure, he finished and released the mare into a secure enclosure, uncertain what would be born. He did not stop there. He combined dragon blood with warg blood and implanted that embryo into a captured female wolf. He mixed dragon and lion, giant eagle and lion, and even traveled back to Weathertop to retrieve basilisk and kraken blood. He tried permutations, lion with dragon and basilisk, basilisk with kraken, warg with basilisk and kraken and dragon, anything he could conceive. He captured a batch of female wolves from the Misty Mountains to serve as surrogates. Not all the experiments succeeded. Some embryos died in utero from genetic conflict. Some pregnancies even cost surrogate mothers their lives. Still, Dewey waited. Before all the hybrids were born, Gandalf returned, bringing good news. He had persuaded King Thengel to meet with the Black Barbarians. At the fords of Isen, downstream from Isengard on Rohan's border, Brog, leader of the Black Barbarians, and King Thengel met for formal peace talks. Dewey and Gandalf attended as witnesses, and the regent prince of Gondor was present as well. Both the king of Rohan and the Gondorian prince expressed respect for Dewey, who had taken Isengard's stewardship after Saruman. Isengard's position controlled vital supply and retreat routes for both kingdoms. They could not ignore who held it. After half a month of intense negotiation, the two sides reached an agreement. Brog promised to stop harassing the border. Rohan agreed not to expel the Black Barbarians and designated the lands near the Isen River along the border as territory where the Black Barbarians could live. Then, to everyone's surprise, Brog swore allegiance to Dewey and requested to become his vassal. Dewey had not expected it. Through legitimacy, he saw the leader's reasoning. Although peace had been made, Brog did not trust Rohan or Gondor. Seeking the protection of a powerful individual was sensible, and Dewey, master of Isengard, was the safest choice. Dewey did not want the added burden and at first refused. But Gandalf pressed him, the Black Barbarians pleaded, and Dewey reluctantly accepted their allegiance. King Thengel and the Gondorian regent had no objection. Indeed, they welcomed it. If Dewey managed the Black Barbarians, the Rohirrim and Gondorians would feel more secure. Before Gandalf, the king, and the regent, Brog half-kneeled and swore fealty to Dewey, promising to follow his commands. Dewey, formerly Lord of Weathertop, now held Isengard and the allegiance of the Black Barbarian territories. He permitted them to settle near Isengard. South of the fortress lay fertile grasslands, open, warm, and previously left uninhabited because Saruman had disliked being disturbed. Brog was delighted. He led his tribe to migrate there, living in tents and forming a first line of defense around Isengard, preventing outsiders from easily approaching the stronghold. Meanwhile, other Black Barbarian groups moved eastward into the Isen River basin along Rohan's western border, where they herded and hunted. As the Black Barbarians settled, Dewey at Isengard received the first results of his hybrid experiments. The giant eagle-horse hybrid was ready to be born. Watching anxiously, Dewey heard the mare's painful whinnies as labor began. After a difficult birth, she delivered a foal still wrapped in its amniotic sac, struggling. The mare, acting on instinct, licked the foal to free it and clean it. When she finished, she stared at her offspring with shock and suspicion. The foal had an eagle's head, a horse's body, and a pair of bare, fleshy wings on its back. The lower ends of its forelegs were not hooves, but eagle talons. Dewey blinked. "A hippogriff?" he murmured, surprised. He had not expected that breeding a giant eagle with a horse would yield a creature so similar to the hippogriff of the magical world, especially since that creature in the magical world was a blend of griffin and horse, not eagle and horse. 209, new species Dewey, watched the trembling newborn before him, so fragile it seemed ready to collapse, and waved his wand to clean the filth from its body. He stepped closer. The white mare that had just given birth stamped and neighed, bewildered at her strange offspring and instinctively protective. Dewey smiled, amused. The mare was all pearly white, gleaming in the sun like a divine steed. Gandalf had admired this breed and even traveled to the Pelennor Plains, hoping to find and tame one. The mare was furious with the human who had caught it. If she had been confident she could win, she would have kicked him. For now, she could only snort and issue warning neighs. Dewey chuckled, made a quick gesture to bind her, and approached the foal. The newborn was a startling mix, an eagle's head atop a foal's body. Dewey regarded it cautiously. Creatures produced by magical hybridization were a roll of the dice. Some failed from weakness, others fused into violent, irrational monsters. Only those hybrids that were physically sound, possessed some intelligence, and were tameable qualified as true new species. He needed to know where this one belonged. The foal tilted its eagle head and examined him with bright, curious eyes. Its gaze held no hint of violence. Dewey reached out and touched it. The foal blinked, leaned into the touch, and gave a soft, affectionate cry, half chirp, half whinny. Far off, giant eagle Thorondor, returning from a hunt, heard that cry and swooped down. It hovered above them, astonished at the little creature that was part eagle and part horse. Dewey grinned. "Thorondor, look, like you, isn't he?" Thorondor uttered bewildered noises. An instinctive kinship seemed to stir in him, until comprehension struck like thunder. He wasn't even an adult. How could he have offspring, and one with a horse's body? Thorondor's disbelief made Dewey's grin widen. He loved watching the giant eagle stagger under this revelation. While Thorondor staggered between denial and reluctant interest, Dewey produced some dried meat and fed the newborn. "From now on," he said, "you'll be called Buckbeak. Your species will be the hippogriff." Dewey had a habit of borrowing names from other worlds when the resemblance fit. The name suited the creature exactly. He released the mare's bonds and let Buckbeak stay beside his mother. After the hippogriff's birth, more hybrid offspring appeared, some successful, many not. Dewey's brow darkened as deformed, violent monsters began to arrive. Lion-bodied beasts with dragon tails, tentacled serpents, lion-headed wolves with snake tails, dragon-tailed wolves wrapped in serpents, horrid splices. Some breathed dragonfire, some carried lethal venom, some were immune to steel and could petrify like a basilisk. These hybrids were dangerous and insane. They attacked their mothers in utero, bit through wombs, burned or poisoned the birthing animals. If Dewey had been less prepared, he might have been overwhelmed. He did not hesitate to burn the worst of them to ash with fiendfire. Even so, a few hybrids proved remarkably successful. One created from a giant eagle and a lion emerged with an eagle's head, a lion's body, and wings, a true griffin. Though it carried some of the lion's wildness, it also showed the giant eagle's intelligence from the start. Dewey named it Aslan, Lion King. Another, produced from a giant eagle and a Miera's implanted into a normal mare, resulted in a pearly white foal with wings, a Pegasus. Its beauty was undeniable. Dewey planned a special place for it. The most surprising success came from a risky experiment. Dewey had combined dragon, basilisk, giant octopus, and warg, 4 powerful, largely incompatible species. He had expected failure or a deformed monster. Against the odds, the genes fused perfectly, and a massive 3-headed wolf pup was born. The pup was so large, nearly half the warg mother's size, that Dewey had to perform a C-section. The pup's 6 round, moist eyes were clear and intelligent rather than maddened. When Dewey approached, all 3 heads swiveled to study him. They sniffed, licked the air with curious tongues, wagged a gigantic tail, and whimpered affectionately. He noticed, though, that saliva dripped from their mouths and hissed as it struck the ground, corroding grass like acid. Dewey jerked his hand back. The pup gave a plaintive look. It had first seen Dewey during the delivery and remembered his scent. Dewey's legitimacy let him sense the pup's simple thoughts: affection, grievance, hunger. With the warg mother dead, Dewey drew milk from his spatial pocket, split it into 3 bottles, and fed them. The pup devoured it eagerly. While it nursed, Dewey used his wand to scan its physiology. The results thrilled him. This 3-headed wolf had fused dragon, basilisk, octopus, and warg traits to astonishing effect. Its hide was as tough as copper skin, its bones felt like iron. Even newborn, its fur resisted blades, its magic resistance was extreme, and its regeneration was powerful. When they were full, the heads displayed 3 different abilities. One burped and spat sparks that incinerated the bottle. Another bit clean through steel with teeth laced with a highly corrosive venom. The third yawned and promptly fell into a heavy sleep, its drool withering grass around it. Fire breath, venom, corrosive secretions, all present. Properly raised, this pup might rival dragons or basilisks. Dewey christened it Cerberus, Hound of Hades, and named the heads Little Left, Little Middle, and Little Right for simplicity. To secure his safety, he took a drop of the pup's blood and bound it with a blood oath, the same method he had used to control previous dangerous hybrids like the basilisk and giant octopus. He also bound Hippogriff, Griffin, and Pegasus with magic contracts. Among the new creatures, Cerberus was by far the most powerful. Near-impervious hide, high magic resistance, multiple lethal abilities, and prodigious growth potential. Aslan the Griffin combined lion strength with an eagle's beak and talons, and the giant eagle's keen intelligence. Though still fledgling, it showed the instinct to fly. Buckbeak the Hippogriff could gallop like a horse and take to the air with talons and beak, smarter than a normal horse, but not truly sentient. The Pegasus, pearly and winged, was perhaps the most beautiful of the lot. Dewey set plans for them. Cerberus would stand guard before Orthanc, a living hound of Hades to bar ill-intentioned visitors. Aslan would patrol the skies over Isengard and its surroundings, keeping watch. Buckbeak would be allowed to roam the grass outside Orthanc within the enclosure walls. The Pegasus Dewey, placed in a crate, transported by fireplace to Weathertop, and presented as a gift. "Arwen," he said with a gentle smile as he released the winged foal, "this is the mount I'm giving you. Do you like it?" Arwen looked at the winged foal, and her face lit with surprise and delight. 210. The value of the resurrection stone. Arwen loved the Pegasus Dewey had given her and named it Elenolos, Star Horse. In the weeks that followed, Dewey kept traveling between Weathertop and Isengard. Among the new bioengineered creatures, the three-headed wolf Cerberus grew the fastest, ballooning in size as if on a schedule. It seemed to add a segment every day. In a month, it had already exceeded 2 meters at the shoulder, larger than an adult warg. From that pace, its final size was anyone's guess. After all, its genetic components included dragons, basilisks, and giant octopi, and even wargs are no small thing. Cerberus's appetite matched its growth. It had graduated from milk to meat, and now devoured a large basin of meat every day. Though the three heads shared one stomach, they still snarled and snapped at one another to grab the choicest pieces, each unwilling to yield. The beast could not speak, but it was cunning and learned to understand Dewey's commands. Under his training, the heads took turns sleeping so that at least one was always alert. A sentinel never left the gate unguarded. Its abilities became more impressive all the time. The teeth and saliva carried potent venom. It could spew searing flame and highly corrosive acid, and with copper-like hide and iron bones, its physical and magical resistances were extraordinary. Griffin Aslan's wings were also maturing and could now flutter for brief low-altitude flights. The hippogriff Buckbeak thrived under the watchful care of his mare companion. The mare always tried to teach this hybrid son to graze, but Buckbeak clearly preferred hunting mice, rabbits, and marmots in the grassy woods. Gandalf returned from the Rohan Plains riding a gray mare as taller than the mare. By day its coat shone like silver. By night it became a ripple of shadow. It was the king of the Mearas, as fast as lightning, capable of sustained high-speed travel with minimal rest, exceptionally intelligent, and unafraid even of a dragon's presence, often whinnying a warning. Gandalf named him Shadowfax. He said he had recognized the king of horses at once and spent 3 days running hundreds of miles to win its trust. Dewey's eyes lit up. With Gandalf's permission, he took a little blood from Shadowfax, intending to crossbreed it with the giant eagles. Could he produce more hippogriffs and pegasi and maybe even create a new species? Gandalf was astonished by Dewey's magical crossbreeding techniques. Seeing the griffin, the old wizard could scarcely look away. He praised the creature over and over. Lion's strength and the eagle's dominion of the sky blended into something he found splendid. The Horse King, however, took offense. Shadowfax ignored Gandalf for several days and bristled at the griffin, always on the verge of giving it a hoof when nobody watched. The young griffin, quick and bold, did not back down and deliberately provoked the horse. For a while, Isengard hummed with activity. Gandalf could not stay still for long. After a short stay at Isengard, he rode off again on Shadowfax. Dewey returned to Weathertop and, with his customary practicality, put Cerberus to work. The month-old child laborer was assigned to guard Orthank's gate. He entrusted Griffin Aslan to Thorondor, the great eagle, to be trained and integrated into aerial patrols. Dewey also visited Fangorn and asked the Ents to watch the area around Isengard. Trees make excellent eyes and ears for the Ents. Through the forest, they could monitor everything nearby. Dewey had nothing to hide, unlike Saruman, and he would not tear down the surrounding woods. Treebeard welcomed the arrangement. Dewey promised not only to refrain from cutting the trees, but to plant more. For the Ents, sworn to protect the forest, this was exactly what they wanted. Back at Hogwarts Castle, Dewey first dug up the gold essence he had buried in the rich land below the mountain. Farmers were harvesting wheat in joy. Dewey unearthed the rune-inscribed gold essence of harvest and fertility, which had soaked in the earth's power and now emitted a deep vitality. He dried it in the sun for 7 days, then rode to a valley in the Weathertop Hills where a 1,000-year oak struggled with parasites. He hollowed a space in the trunk by magic, placed the gold essence, now also marked with healing and life runes, inside, and sealed and enchanted the hollow to mend the tree. He only needed to wait until autumn and winter, when the oak bore fruit and the parasites swelled. Then he would retrieve the gold essence and begin crafting Hufflepuff's golden cup. This was an ancient Celtic nature ritual, and it explained how Hufflepuff's cup differed from artifacts like the Sword of Gryffindor or Ravenclaw's diadem. With that in motion, Dewey turned to other tasks. Among the ores he had brought back from the paths of the dead was rock tainted with the sulfur of souls, formed when ghostly tears fell on ore, and that sulfur held remnant soul power. He smelted the ore slowly in a furnace. After more than a month, he finally extracted pure sulfur of souls. For the Philosopher's Stone, he now had quicksilver of spirit and sulfur of souls. Only the final ingredient, the salt of flesh, remained. Elrond had pointed him to the first two materials, but the salt of flesh was most likely found in Hildorian, the mythic birthplace of men in the East. Over the ages, its location had been lost, and even Elrond did not know precisely where it lay. Worse, the East lay within Sauron's sphere of influence. A journey there to search for the salt of flesh would almost certainly encounter Sauron's forces. Dewey would need thorough preparations before he dared go east. Before leaving, he wanted to complete two things to strengthen his position: finish Hufflepuff's Golden Cup and create the Resurrection Stone. Hufflepuff's Cup was already underway, so in the waiting period, he focused on the Resurrection Stone. The Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows, cannot truly restore the dead to life. It summons soul projections of the deceased, figures more substantial than ghosts but lacking true physical being. Only the holder can see them. Summoning them is rarely a comfort. Those called back resent being dragged from the afterlife and cause the living pain. Legend calls the Hallows gifts from death. In truth, they were inventions of the Peverell brothers. The Resurrection Stone was crafted by the second Peverell, who tried in vain to bring back his beloved. Because true resurrection is forbidden and impossible, he eventually chose his own death to join her. On the surface, the stone seems almost useless, only a way to call shades, but Dewey had discovered another, greater use, to summon dead masters and learn their lost arts and secrets. He looked at the ring Saruman had made that hung around his neck. Saruman's ring enhanced its wearer, but it was no match for the three elven rings. If Dewey could summon Celebrimbor, the smith who forged the elven rings, he might persuade him to reforge or teach him techniques to create a ring comparable to those three. He could call Fëanor, artisan of the Silmarils, to learn his methods. He could question countless other craftsmen and sages who had gone to the halls of Mandos. Of course, such summoning might attract Mandos's notice. If the Lord of the Dead perceived this as an affront to his authority, the consequences could be grave. Still, the risk might be worth it. But the Resurrection Stone's recipe troubled him. It required a rare death substance that could bridge life and death. In legend, Peverell had discovered the Door of Death, the stone arch in the Department of Mystery's death chamber, and captured death substance from it to make the stone. In Britain's Ministry of Magic, there is indeed such an arch with a tattered black veil, the Veil of Death, hanging from it. Only those who have faced death can hear the voices beyond it. The arch is said to be a gateway to the dead. Pass through it and there is no return. The ministry built around it and established the Department of Mysteries to study the arch and other enigmas. Middle-earth, however, has no door of death. How, then, could he capture death substance? Dewey turned the problem over in his sharp mind and seized upon a thought. While this world has no stone arch to the dead, it does possess an overlapping, unseen realm, a netherworld that coexists with the physical. Bilbo, when wearing the One Ring, slips partly into that realm and becomes invisible to the physical eye. Frodo, struck by the Ringwraith's Morgul blade, gradually drifted toward it. If death substance could be found, perhaps it could be taken from that netherworld. That led to the next problem. How could he enter the netherworld? 211. Enter the netherworld. Dew knew of only two ways to enter the netherworld, by wearing the One Ring or by being stabbed with a Morgul blade. Neither option was realistic. Even a Maya like Gandalf dared not touch the ring because of its corrupting power. Wearing it would let someone slip into the netherworld, but the likely result was corruption and becoming Sauron's thrall. Besides, the ring was currently kept by Tom Bombadil. As for being stabbed by a Morgul blade, Dewey would not mutilate himself. A Morgul wound was insidious. A fragment of the blade remained in the flesh and slowly worked its way toward the heart. Untreated, the victim gradually turned into something between ghost and wraith, a lesser wraith bound to Sauron. Even with the best healing, wounds of that kind never healed cleanly. Frodo still felt pain every year after his own Morgul wound, until one could be healed only in the West. Dewey would not risk that. Left with no other options, Dewey turned to Elrond, his know-it-all father-in-law. They walked a quiet, winding path in Rivendell, while Dewey explained what he wanted. Elrond paused, frowned slightly, and asked, "You wish to enter the Netherworld?" Dewey nodded. "I want to take death matter from the Netherworld to forge a device that can break the boundary between life and death." He explained the principle of his resurrection stone. It did not truly call back a soul, but produced a projection, more substantial than a mere ghost, but less than a living body, like a projection of memories and will. Elrond's eyes widened. "All the dead go to the halls of Mandos to receive judgment. No spirit may leave unless Mandos permits it. If your stone can force a soul returned, it would be a power equivalent to the greatest of treasures, reserved to Mandos himself." Dewey corrected him gently. "It won't truly raise the dead. It will summon a projection, an image of the soul, more real than a spirit but not the living person." "That is already remarkable," Elrond said. "Truly summoning a dead soul would be the Lord of the Dead's domain alone." They spoke then of how to enter the Netherworld. Elrond explained that the Netherworld was a spiritual strand of the same world. Those who died and refused Mandos' summons, or whose spirits were not claimed, might linger here. The Nazgul were the most familiar Netherworld creatures. Stripped of Sauron's facade, they were formless wraiths. The Netherworld was not inherently evil. There were both light and dark presences there. Powerful beings like Lady Galadriel or Glorfindel could perceive and move within it without aid and without harm. "But for you," Elrond said gravely, "you will need help, and you must take great care. The Netherworld is dangerous. Living creatures there are visible to the spirits that dwell within. Your magic will be blunted. Inside, you are like any ordinary person, vulnerable to their attacks. You cannot tarry. If you remain too long, your body may be transformed into a Netherworld creature, and you will be lost. Above all, do not let any Netherworld being wound you. Once injured, you will weaken and be changed into something insubstantial, forever wandering in that realm. Will you take that risk?" Dewey was not deterred. He smiled faintly, nodded, and said, "For the resurrection stone I must try." Elrond studied him, then handed him a scroll and a sword. "This is an ancient magical array for communicating with the Netherworld, an elven formation once used to call to elven spirits who refused Mandos. And this," he unwrapped a black blade wrapped in leather stamped with sealing runes, "is a Morgul blade. Use it as your guide. You must find a place thick with the aura of death, activate the array at midnight, and use this blade to pierce the veil." He warned him again, sternly, "You must not stay more than a quarter of an hour, and under no circumstances may you be wounded. The Netherworld's corruption works quickly." Dewey nodded solemnly. Elrond, satisfied that Dewey understood, gave him the scroll and the blade, and said no more. Arwen knew of the plan. She looked worried, but did not forbid him. She only told him to be careful. After studying the array scroll, Dewey prepared. He needed a place steeped in death, where the boundary between the worlds was weakest. The first place he thought of, Gujiagong, was no good. Dewey had purged much of its evil. The aura of death there was thin, and the Gu family's corpse demon lay dormant. He chose Fornost on the North Downs instead, the ruined capital of Arthedain. There, the Witch King had laid waste, and the battlefield had been a grinding slaughter. Countless Dunedain and the Witch King's minions fell. Many were buried in haste along the defensive banks, others left as piled bones. The place had been called the Dead Man's Dyke for 1,000 years. The stain of death remained, and the aura of death there was strong. Dewey apparated to the North Downs and chose a spot near the embankment where the fighting had been fiercest. He drew the elven formation on the ground, placed the Morgul blade at its center, and waited for night. As midnight approached, he activated the array. The surrounding aura of death surged toward the circle, creating an unseen disturbance around the blade. The world dimmed as if a veil had been drawn over it. The moon took on a blood-hued sheen, and thin whispers and chilling laughter began to come from everywhere. Inside the arcane circle, the space felt separated from the world, the formation's boundary a clear line between realities. Dewey stepped across without hesitation. Cold seized him, as if he had plunged into icy water. He shivered, as though his bones themselves were freezing. He forced the sensation down and moved to the center to lift the blade. The instant his fingers closed around the Morgul blade, the world transformed. Colors leached away. Everything went gray and washed out, as if seen through eternal shadow. The air itself felt dead and cold. He had entered the netherworld, the region between life and death, and the Morgul blade had been the key that opened it. Dewey checked his person. Nothing had vanished from his pack, but when he flicked his wand, it felt like a stick. He could not sense the flow of magic within him. His spells were meaningless here. Elrond's warning came back sharply. Inside this place, he was effectively mortal. What tightened his chest was what he now saw all around him. Where a barren field had been in the world, the netherworld teemed with twisted, stable spirits. Orcs, trolls, wargs, and humans. These were not the noble dead of Arthedain. They were the wicked men who had followed the Witch King and the foul creatures of Angmar. Having refused Mandos's summons, their spirits had persevered here, feeding on the dark aura. They were more substantial and vicious than any ghosts Dewey had seen on the paths of the dead. Their eyes glowed with hunger. Their faces were stenched and rotten. A living one. "I smell his life," hissed a voice, and with that the creatures flooded toward him. They came in a tide of decay, skeleton and tattered flesh, rank breath and grasping claws, rushing to close with him. Facing hundreds of netherworld creatures, Dewey remained calm and stood his ground, though he could not use his magic. As expected, when the ghosts charged, they struck the magic array like a solid wall. They came within a foot of him, but could not advance. The ghosts roared and lashed with weapons, trying to smash the array's protection, but no matter how fiercely they struck, it held fast. Dewey let out a quiet breath of relief and thanked Elrond inwardly for the ward. Still, if the ghosts kept battering at it, the array would not last forever. His mission was to collect death matter. He could not waste more time entangled with these things. He took out the starlight bottle containing the light of Arundel and shook it. A dazzling, sacred white radiance filled the netherworld, the only color in that gray void. The light of Arundel, born of the two holy trees, repelled and tormented the netherworld creatures. The ghosts shrank back at the sight of it, their rotten faces twisted with reluctance and covetousness. Dewey ignored them, lifted the starlight bottle, stepped out of the array, and began to search for death matter. Wargs, orcs, and wicked human phantoms followed at a distance, never leaving him a clear chance. Soon his eyes lit on a small wisp of black mist floating and churning nearby, as if alive. Though easy to miss, it carried a strong aura of death, the essence he sought. Even the surrounding ghosts kept their distance. He did not touch the mist with his hands. From a pouch, he drew a black bottle he had prepared earlier and guided the wisp carefully into it. The bottle had been fashioned from fragments of the black stone wall he had cut from the paths of the dead, obsidian of a peculiar kind. Elrond had told him that this obsidian could clear the minds of the dead and preserve things that were otherwise invisible. Since death matter is formless to the living eye, an obsidian vessel was the best container. One wisp was hardly enough. Peverell had guarded the door of death for years before gathering enough death matter to forge a resurrection stone. Dewey knew he would need far more. Death matter was scarce even in the netherworld. He scoured Fornost, but managed only a few more wisps. All the while, the evil phantoms tracked him, greedy, cold eyes fixed on the obsidian bottle. He wanted to press farther, to collect more, but the little hourglass he used to time his entry was nearly empty. He had to return to the magic array. He was a living man. Linger too long in that realm, and the nether would corrode him until he became one of its creatures, losing any hope of return. The netherworld and the real world are two sides of the same coin, but run like parallel lines, rarely touching. Ordinary folk cannot see the netherworld, and its denizens cannot normally affect the living world. Some, like the ringwraiths, cross between worlds only by Sauron's power and the One Ring. Others, bound by curses or oaths, like the dead on the paths of the dead, are fixed to places. Dewey dashed back to the array, and amid the ghosts' despairing howls and malevolent stares, plunged the Morgul blade into the formation and released it just before the hourglass ran out. The moment his hand left the hilt, the air shifted. The shapes and cries of the evil spirits vanished. The gray, dim landscape brightened and regained color. He had returned to the real world. He stood alone. The night around him was utterly still. No insects, no wind, only the moon hung clear and full. He let out a long breath. The netherworld had been oppressive, dark and cold as icy water. Breathing there had been hard, the chill creeping into his bones until his heart felt nearly frozen. In that place, his usual magic had been weak. Without the starlight bottle given by Lady Galadriel, he would not have survived to take any of the death matter. He glanced at the array. The death key around it had been nearly spent. It could not sustain another entry. That was regrettable, but when he looked at the obsidian bottle, he was pleased. The trip had been dangerous but successful. He had captured some death matter. To normal eyes, the bottle looked empty. To him, there was a small ball of cold, death-filled energy inside. He erased the traces of the array with a gesture. An apparition carried him back to Weathertop. He was not wholly unaffected by the netherworld. He spent several days on the castle lawn in the sun, letting the warmth draw out the last chill. Then he set about planning another entry. To reach the netherworld, one must find a place thick with death key, a site where many had died. His first choice had been the Dead Marshes, the battlefield of the last alliance, where countless elves, men, orcs, and others had perished. The death key there was dense, and corpse lights drifted over the water. The barrier between worlds was weakest there, and nether beings sometimes broke through. But the Dead Marshes lay too close to Mordor. Going there would risk drawing Sauron's attention. Reluctantly, Dewey abandoned that plan. He turned his thoughts to Dol Guldur. Once the stronghold of the necromancer, it was steeped in evil and death, an obvious source of death key. He traveled to Lothlorien by the fireplace and apparitioned to Dol Guldur. The malign aura there, however, remained stubbornly strong. After all that had been done to expel Sauron before, Dewey had expected Dol Guldur to have faded. Its persistent darkness was abnormal. He cloaked himself with a disillusionment charm and used instantaneous movement to slip through the fortress, observing. The place teemed with orcs, great Olog-hai, trolls that endured sunlight, giant spiders, wargs, and other foul things. They hid in the buildings and in underground caves they had dug beneath the keep. A gust of wind stirred. A warg sniffed the air, caught an unfamiliar scent, and howled alert. Orcs and Olog-hai seized their weapons and swept their gazes around. Dewey let the disillusionment fall away. The orcs' snarls turned to recognition and then to terror as they saw him. "It's him, the bane of the orcs, the black-robed wizard," one shrieked. Fear spread at once. "Run, the black-robed wizard, he's come for our lives again." The orcs scattered in panic. The Olog-hai, slow to perceive, stared after them in confusion. Dewey gave them no quarter. He took the ring of power from the cord at his throat, slid it onto his finger, and summoned Fiendfire with all his strength. Empowered by the ring, the Fiendfire flared into a furious blaze and took on horrid shapes, balrogs, dragons, basilisks, rushing through the fortress. Everything flammable burned, orcs, Olog-hai, spiders, even the beasts in the caves. Dol Guldur was consumed. The dark creatures within and beneath it were reduced to ash. The flames rose high enough that they could be seen from the topmost Malorn platforms in Lothlorien and burned until every last evil thing was gone. When the final creature had been annihilated, Dewey waved his hand and stilled the Fiendfire. The Balrog, dragon, and basilisk manifestations died down obediently, showing no sign of resisting their master. He looked at the ring on his hand and felt satisfaction. It had been the first time he had fully woven a spell with the ring's aid. Its power had indeed been extraordinary. Without it, he could not have dominated such massive fiendfire, nor compelled the terrible manifestations to obey. With Dol Guldur's evil dealt with, Dewey turned his gaze skyward and began preparing the magic array for re-entry into the Netherworld. 213. Netherworld ringwraith Dol Guldur had buried more lives than most places, and because Sauron, in his necromancer guise, had researched dark magics there, the air of death and corruption was far thicker than at Fornost in the North Downs. Dewey chose an open platform and drew his summoning circle, waiting until midnight to activate the formation. As the surrounding death energy congealed into the sigils, the barrier between the living world and the netherworld was torn. The circle became a gateway, a passage between the two realms. He stepped into the formation and lifted the Morgul blade he had brought as a key. The moment his fingers closed around the cold metal, the world slid away. Colors leached out, the landscape turning hazy and desolate. Solid things around him became translucent and unreal. Conversely, the spirits that inhabited the place grew solid, vivid. Dewey was no stranger to the netherworld, but when the ghosts crowded in around him, he still found himself staring in stunned disbelief. Orc, Olog Hai, Warg, creatures he had burned to ash with fiend fire, now hovered here as specters. Not every dead thing should have been dragged into the netherworld, so the sight puzzled him. Stranger still, these ghosts had dull, puppet-like eyes, perhaps a result of their recent deaths. Among them were also souls that had obviously been corrupted long ago, twisted humans, dwarves, orcs, trolls, even elves, their faces warped by foul sorcery and emptied of will. Dewey recognized the pattern at once. These were the undead Sauron had captured, experimented on, or bound with necromantic spells when he was still a necromancer. For reasons unknown, their souls had not been ferried to the halls of Mandos. Instead, they remained trapped here, broken and slavish. As soon as the ghosts saw a living being, they surged forward, claws and mouths reaching to bite and devour. Dewey retreated into the safety of the magic circle. The spirits could not pass its boundary. He did not linger. Time was short, and he needed to gather more death matter. He produced the star glass and released the light of Arendil, a brilliant holy radiance that forced the nearest phantoms back. Then he stepped out of the circle and began collecting death matter into his obsidian vial, the light at his back keeping the spirits at bay. Dol Guldur in the netherworld proved a richer source of death matter than Fornost. Dewey filled his vial steadily, hurrying as the ravenous ghosts pressed close. Then the atmosphere shifted. Darkness pooled like tar, suffocating and viscous, pressing to snuff out his light. A cold, despairing aura spread. Something in the gloom came feathered and silent and struck. Dewey drew his sword and deflected the missile. The dark shaft thudded to the ground. Morgul arrow, he snarled. This was not the crude shaft the orcs used. This was the ringwraith's arrow, deadlier and steeped in poison. He knew only one of the Nazgul excelled at archery, Kamal, once leader of the Easterlings. As the ghosts parted on their own, Kamal rode out on a phantom steed. The ringwraith was clearer here than any vision Dewey had yet seen. Gaunt and towering, black robes hanging from skin that clung to bone, the flesh a filmy ruin with sunken eyes burning red with hellfire. A foul miasma trailed from him, and a hiss of cursing whispers hung in the air. His bow and arrows seemed made of bone. His red eyes glittered with malice. Black-robed wizard Dewey, the wraith rasped, voice like a fell wind, your trespass into the netherworld is the worst mistake of your life. This realm answers to me. Your glamour is nothing here. Angmar failed to break you into slavery. Allow me to take this valuable prize for my master. He will be pleased. Kamal's tone was triumphant. As one of the 9, second only to the Witch King, he was known as the Shadow of the East, the Lieutenant, the Black Easterling. In the real world, Kamal would be cautious, but here, in his own domain, he was more than a lord. He commanded the dead. The ghosts that had fled the light of Arendil were now unbothered, driven by him to surge at Dewey. Even lit by Arendil's light, they pressed on as if it meant nothing. Under the ringwraith's influence, the light itself began to thin and dim. Dewey's face hardened. The light of Arendil was potent but finite. If it were exhausted, he would be trapped. He lashed out with his flame sword. Spirit flesh melted and fell away wherever the blade struck. But there were too many phantoms, and Kamul, cautious of the light, remained at a distance, using his minions to wear Dewey down while sending poisoned arrows in to corrupt any wound and transform the victim into a spirit under his command, much like the Witch King's Morgul weaponry. Trained by Elrohir and Eladon, fortified by Entdrot and the wisdom of his crown, Dewey's reflexes were sharp. He deflected a string of Morgul arrows. He began to fall back toward the summoning circle, watching the sand drain in his alchemical hourglass. Kamul noticed and spurred his spectral mount, charging the circle. From horseback, he smashed a heavy mace down, trying to break the formation and cut off Dewey's return. The blow rippled across the sigils, but the circle held. Dewey smiled coldly. "Fool," he said. This circle was bound in the real world. How would you, while in the netherworld, destroy something anchored to the living world? Cummel's mouth twisted, then understanding flickered. A helpful reminder, he sneered. His form went gauzy and insubstantial, then he stepped free into the real world. As a servant of the ring's power, he could traverse both realms at will. Once there, he swung the mace and shattered Dewey's drawn circle in a single, brutal blow. The barrier in the netherworld fell away. The ghosts could now cross. From his vantage in the real world, Cummel gloated. Your circle is broken. You'll remain in the netherworld, become one of us, and be my thrall. Dewey laughed, amusement in his eyes, dismissive and sharp. He loosened his grip on the Morgul blade and let it fall. The colors of the world returned. He had stepped back into the living world as well. Who said I intended to leave the netherworld by your little gateway, he asked. Then, in one quick motion, he cast a spell he had used before. Expecto Patronum. The ring on his finger flared, and a vast, blinding owl Patronus burst forth. An avian of such size it rivaled Thorondor, wings tearing open the air into a pure field of white. The brilliance filled the space, leaving no gap for Camul to flee back through. Before the ringwraith could react, the owl struck, engulfing him within its transparent corporeal body. Camul thrashed, trapped and screeching inside the luminous form. Dewey raised the star glass and poured magic into it. The light of Arundel flared to a searing white, sanctified fire that licked at the ringwraith. Camul howled as the light burned his robes to tatters. His twisted flesh flaked away like charred paper. Seeing him weaken, Dewey drew one of the barrow-down daggers he had taken long ago, an old sharp blade known to slay such things, and hurled it. The dagger struck the ringwraith squarely in the skull. The wail that followed echoed through Dol Guldur as Camul's shape writhed and collapsed like a sack of air gone flat. He ruptured in a final convulsion, releasing a thunderous shockwave. When the radiance faded, nothing remained of the Nazgul but a single ring that rolled across the ground and came to rest at Dewey's feet. Dewey carefully used his wand to pick up the ring dropped by the ringwraith Camul. It was pure gold, inlaid with a white gem. One of the 9 rings of men, then? He examined it with interest. A strong temptation radiated from the ring, urging him to slip it on for greater power and a long life. Dewey snorted and placed it inside a mithril box, sealing and isolating its influence. The 9 rings of men granted near immortality, but they were a honeyed poison. Sauron had threaded them with his corruption. Once worn, a man's mind would be eroded, his body reduced to a shadow until he became a ringwraith, wholly subject to Sauron's will. Unexpectedly coming into possession of one of those rings put Dewey in a good mood. Sauron must be furious, he thought. The Dark Lord had distributed the 9 rings to the ringwraiths to increase their power. Losing one so quickly would vex him. Dewey wondered whether Sauron would recall the rest. He thought briefly about the matter, then returned his attention to the obsidian bottle collecting death matter. The ringwraith's sudden appearance had cost him time, but the intense death matter of Dol Guldur's netherworld let him gather more in a short span than he had at Fornos Doraine. The bottle was half full. Looking around at Dol Guldur, where the aura of death clung stubbornly to the air, Dewey decided he did not need to seek a new location. He could keep gathering here. He would go back to Lothlorien first, spend a few days sunlight bathing to dispel the chill in his body, then return to Dol Guldur to enter the netherworld again. On Barad-dûr in Mordor, the moment the ringwraith Camul fell, Sauron knew. The eye above the great tower flared with a darker, more furious flame. Shock and wrath burned in it. The other ringwraiths below prostrated themselves in fear, begging for calm. Through the vertical pupil of the eye, like a black abyss, Camul's figure reappeared, and Sauron sifted through all his memories. Rage surged. "Wretch," the eye thundered, a presence like an abyss. "You failed to hold Dol Guldur. You were deceived by that black-robed wizard and slain in the real world, and you lost the ring of power I gave you. Camal, my servant, what use are you now?" Terrified by Sauron's overwhelming presence, Camul begged, "Master, please, I will retrieve the ring." Before he finished, a pain from the depths of his soul tore through him. His spirit body twisted and writhed as if in hellish torment, screams shredding the air. The other ringwraiths lay prostrate, petrified to even breathe, fearing to draw Sauron's attention. When Sauron's fury finally ebbed, Kamal's spirit was weak and near collapse. Yet with Sauron's will upon him, he could not truly die, only endure. Kamal, I will give you one more chance. Bring me the Ring of Power, or I will have you replaced, Sauron said. Yes, master, I will bring it back. Kamal nodded and promised desperately. Humph, do not disappoint me. Saruman stepped from behind the ring wraiths then, voice laced with mockery. Sauron, you pin your hopes on these scraps to steal the 9 rings back from that black-robed wizard boy? You might as well help me reclaim Isengard. He wore a white robe shot through with many colors and carried a black staff, calling himself the Wizard of Many Colors. He argued that white could be dyed, white paper written on, light divided. He intended to encompass all power. The staff in his hand had been reforged with Mordor's aid. Since his rescue by Sauron's forces, Saruman had not given up on Isengard. Learning that Dewey had become Lord of Isengard only fueled his hatred. If Dewey hadn't lured him out, Saruman would not now be defeated, homeless, and dependent. Sauron's reaction to Saruman was not the contempt he showed the ringwraiths. He spoke to Saruman with a measured respect. I will help you reclaim Isengard, but not now. Messengers from Rohan and Gondor report that the black-robed wizard has subjugated the Dunlendings and brokered peace between them and Rohan. You have no allies there, unless I send Mordor's armies. But first we must deal with Rohan and Gondor, otherwise Mordor's forces cannot reach Isengard. Saruman's face clouded with bitterness, his eyes burned with jealousy and hatred. Dewey, he spat, the name tasting of bile. Sauron allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He relished that Saruman, exiled and stripped of power, had been forced to become his subordinate. Their relationship, once mutual manipulation through the Palantir, was now openly unbalanced. Saruman had lost his tower, his staff and ring stolen. Reliant on Sauron, he had become useful. In Mordor, Saruman proved himself a superb engineer. He oversaw mass construction, invented explosives, forged massive weapons, and even pursued dark breeding experiments, crossing orcs with other races to create the Uruk-hai, strong, sun-tolerant soldiers. Sauron asked, how do the legions progress? Saruman shook his head. Uruk-hai and trolls are not afraid of sunlight, true, but they are little more than cannon fodder. They can stand against men, perhaps, but they are helpless against beings like that black-robed wizard. His magic fire can incinerate thousands at once. Sauron agreed. Orc armies had once been unstoppable, but the black-robed wizard's power was unlike that of other wizards, unrestrained and fundamentally different. Sauron had watched the battle of 5 armies through the Palantir. From then on, Dewey became his main concern. With Dewey's interference, Sauron's influence was shrinking. The giant spiders in Mirkwood had been eradicated, his spider queen slain. Sauron's orcs in Moria fell to Dewey and the dwarves. His forces in Eriador were eliminated. Each defeat marked Dewey as a formidable enemy. Like Saruman, Sauron longed to eliminate him. What is your plan, then? Sauron asked. Saruman's expression sharpened. He sneered, that black-robed wizard boy has a dragon. Why shouldn't we? Morgoth once commanded legions of dragons. Do you not want one, Sauron? Sauron's desire was plain. He had even tried to contact Smaug at the Lonely Mountain, but dragons were proud creatures who answered only to Morgoth. Even Smaug gave Sauron no deference. An elder dragon that had survived the War of Wrath would be beyond convincing. I do not mean to tame it, Saruman continued. I know of another dragon, an ancient elder, that survived the War of Wrath. It is larger and more powerful than Smaug, a cold dragon. Its breath freezes the soul. The mountain where it slumbers is perpetually snowbound. I do not seek its obedience. I want its bone and blood. By crossing its flesh with fell beasts and giant lizards, we can breed wyverns, create our own wyvern legions. Sauron's eye flared with sudden, eager fire. You can do that? Saruman inclined his head. Yes, but the dragon's power is immense. We must work together to deal with this sleeping cold dragon. Sauron laughed, the sound sweeping away his anger over the stolen ring. Do as you propose. I have an even better idea, Saruman added, his voice darkening. We can implant an evil spirit into that dragon, bind it to our will. Dewey knew nothing of Sauron and Saruman's schemes. He entered the Netherworld several more times after that, only stopping once he had gathered enough death matter. The materials for the Resurrection Stone were at hand, but its forging required a ritual at the midnight junction between Old and New Year, when Sirius, Hell Ruin, stood directly overhead. That meant the work would have to wait until after he finished the Hufflepuff Cup. For the moment, he put the Resurrection Stone aside and turned his attention to the Rings of Men, consulting with Galadriel, Elrond, and Celeborn about how to deal with them. The 9 rings had long been steeped in Sauron's malice. Though potent, they were too dangerous to handle. The 4 agreed the rings must be destroyed. Elrond pointed out that, unlike the One Ring, the 9 were not impossible to break. Ancient dragonfire had consumed several of the dwarven rings. Perhaps a dragon could destroy a ring of men. Everyone agreed. Dewey summoned Smaug and set him to burn the ring. The dragon's fire heated the metal red hot, but Smaug was not the mightiest of dragons. His flames would have to lick at the ring for days to finish the job. Seeing this, Dewey intervened. He brought a bowl of basilisk venom, taken from Herpo's basilisk, and immersed the ring in it. The venom boiled and hissed, corroding the metal like acid. The process was slower, but it ate at the ring's surface, pitting and dulling it. To speed things further, Dewey added fiendfire to Smaug's flames. Under the triple assault of dragonfire, venom, and fiendfire, the ring's destruction became unmistakable. The 9 rings were more than jewelry. They were repositories of the ringwraith's essence, Horcrux-like anchors for their spirits. When the metal began to fail, Kamal, the ringwraith bound to that ring, felt it immediately. He screamed in a voice of pain and terror. As venom corroded the ring, his spiritual form became shredded and pitted, as if eaten by acid. When dragonfire and fiendfire took hold, his wraith caught blaze and withered. The commotion terrified the other Nazgul and drew Sauron's attention. Sauron's fury flared. He had hoped, if Dewey obtained Kamal's ring, that Dewey might be tempted, corrupted, even turned into another Nazgul as had happened to kings of old. Instead, Dewey was trying to destroy it. Sauron reached out with the ring's voice, activating its seductive power to stop him. But Dewey was prepared. He bore the light of Arendil and called forth his Patronus. The ring's call found no purchase. Steady, he held the fiendfire and directed Smaug's fire until the metal finally gave way. Sauron did not send the other Nazgul to seize the ring. Any assault would have meant confronting Elrond and Galadriel in Dewey's company, a sure path to greater losses. Helplessly, Sauron watched as Kamal's wailing spirit was consumed. After a day of continuous assault, the ring melted. The pale stone set in its band shattered, and a dense black mist poured forth, coalescing for an instant into Kamal's hideous face. With one final, unwilling scream, it exploded and dispersed. In Barad-dûr, the Nazgul Kamal simply vanished, gone from the world and beyond Sauron's power to raise. The remaining 8 Nazgul trembled with dread. For a moment, Sauron's eye was like a slumbering storm, then it burst with terrible rage. The skies over Mordor darkened, Mount Doom vomited lava and smoke, and all the dark creatures bowed and cowered as their master's wrath roared. Dewey, having cut off one of Sauron's aides, allowed himself a quiet breath of relief. One less ring, one fewer shadow to fear. Seasons turned. In Eriador, the oaks dropped acorns and the mistletoe on their branches bloomed. On the 6th night after full moon, Dewey apparated to a 1,000-year-old oak in a weathertop valley. He clipped the mistletoe, harvesting it on a white cloth so it never touched the ground, then plucked 7 fat acorns from the shaded side of the trunk. With a golden sickle, he felled the mistletoe. With a wand wave, the ancient tree split open to reveal a long, hidden gold essence. The fist-sized ingot bore Celtic carvings for life, healing, and protection on one face, and runes of abundance on the other. It hummed with the living aura of the earth. It was not cold metal, but something like living gold. With the acorns, mistletoe, and gold essence, Dewey returned to Weathertop. He exposed the gold essence to 9 days of sunlight and 9 nights of moonlight, then baked it in a furnace for 13 days, forging and suffusing it with enchantments each day. He worked the metal into a delicate 2-handled cup, carving runes and patterns with a central badger motif. It took over a month of steady labor. The cup was small, substantial, and warm to the touch, its surface inscribed with mysterious symbols that breathed an earthy, life-giving power. Yet it was not finished. The final enchantment had to be performed at Saturn opposition. Before the opposition, Dewey still needed a potion. He brewed one from the mistletoe and acorns, acquiring a few rare Middle-earth ingredients from Radagast in Mirkwood to complete the brew. The potion took the better part of a moon cycle to prepare. The time for Saturn opposition, Lumbar's opposition, came soon after. In Middle-earth, Saturn is called Lumbar. At opposition, it blazes brighter than the star of Arundel. At sunset, Lumbar rose in the east, blazing pale yellow. On Weathertop's broad lawn, a ring of megaliths, an old druid circle from the wizarding world, stood aligned to the heavens, each stone carved with ancient runes. Helga Hufflepuff, founder of Hufflepuff House, had been a traditional druid wizard. The circle was her lost array. Dewey set the golden cup, brimful of his mistletoe and acorn potion, on the central stone and began to chant the old rites like a druid priest. His voice echoed among the stones. The ground trembled faintly as the array awakened and drew astrological power down from Lumbar. When the star reached its zenith, a pillar of pale yellow light shot from the sky into the stone circle. Across the continent, various eyes turned toward the beam. In Mordor, the Eye of Barad-dûr stared westward with a plodding glare. The astrological force poured into the liquid in the cup. The clear brew took on a golden hue, glowing from within and exhaling a scent like rain-wet earth, sap, and wildflowers. The aroma alone filled Dewey with vigor. Aches from standing hours evaporated as if the scent were medicine. He wondered at once what drinking the liquid would do. The array would not allow him to test it that way. The golden light drew the potion into the cup until the liquid itself seemed to become one with the metal. The ritual sealed the enchantment as Lumbar sank toward the west. The stones calmed, and on the central platform, the two-handled golden cup sat quietly, newly charged. Dewey picked it up. "Aguamenti," he bade. A stream of spring water filled the cup. He tapped the rim with his wand. "Turn into wine." The clear water deepened to red and exhaled the aroma of a fine vintage. He lifted the cup and sipped. Warmth and nourishing power flowed through him. The drink restored his spent magic, healed small maladies of body and charm alike, and left him lighter, steadier, and full of renewed strength. 216. Blue-robed wizard Dew turned the golden cup over in his hands and smiled. Unlike the sword of Gryffindor or Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup is not a weapon, and it does not bestow great wisdom. But it is a holy vessel. It heals wounds, restores the body, and replenishes magic. Aside from phoenix tears, nothing else neutralizes basilisk venom, except this cup. Long use brings a measure of longevity as well. It keeps one healthy and free of disease, which is why Helga Hufflepuff lived longer than the other founders. Beyond its miraculous healing, the cup is a useful household treasure. It can summon or teleport delicacies, multiply food, and continuously produce fine wine, milk, tea, or other beverages. Dewey had finished crafting it and left Stonehenge with the cup in his possession. He planned to bring it on future travels and to banquets. He left Stonehenge standing in the castle as an attraction. Perhaps it would prove useful again. From Stonehenge, Dewey apparated through the fireplaces to Rivendell. "Dewey, did you succeed with the golden cup?" Arwen asked gently, worry still showing in her face. She had seen the starlight projection on Weathertop the night before. Although she trusted Dewey, she needed to know he had finished it. Dewey smiled and nodded. "It's a success." Relief washed across Arwen's features, and she smiled sincerely. "Congratulations," she said. After Dewey returned to Weathertop to live more permanently, Elrond had left Arwen in Rivendell under the care of her brothers Eladon and Elrohir. Although Dewey and Arwen cared for each other, they could not live together until they were married. Besides, Arwen now had a new pet, the white Pegasus Dewey had given her. She kept the foal in Rivendell and doted on it. The other elves adored the pure white creature too. Even Elrond and Arwen's brothers visited often. Seeing how fond they were, Dewey had offered to breed 3 more Pegasi for them, which made the brothers unusually pleased. The prospective foals were already being tended in Isengard, waiting to be born. As they spoke of Pegasi, a whinny sounded from above. Dewey looked up to see a pearly white Pegasus descending through the sunlight, magnificent and swift. It swept down with a joyful cry, beating its great wings, and landed on the platform. It nudged Arwen and then Dewey, affectionate and eager. Dewey stroked its neck with a grin. Arwen had named the foal Elenoros, Star Horse. Though not yet fully grown, it carried genes from the great eagles, larger than ordinary mounts, with fully formed wings and keen sight. It was already Rivendell's darling. The elves quietly plotted to find it a mate when it matured. Elves had their schemes too. After comforting the Pegasus, Dewey and Arwen went to see Elrond. He was as composed and gentle as ever, his eyes full of quiet wisdom. "Did everything go smoothly?" he asked. Dewey understood and smiled. "I did not fail you." He produced the golden cup and handed it to Elrond. Elrond examined the artifact with evident admiration. He had suspected Dewey was crafting something when starlight shone on Weathertop, and he had once worn Dewey's crown of wisdom, which he had greatly valued. But today, the cup pleased him even more. As a healer, he appreciated its powers of restoration and poison neutralization. He handed it back with a smile and a slight sigh. "With this cup, my craft feels almost redundant. I doubt any poison left in this world would trouble you now." Dewey shook his head. "Lord Elrond, you flatter me. It is an artifact with uses, but it is not omnipotent, nor is it comparable to your skill in healing." He was sincere. No artifact, not even his cup, could compare to Elrond's mastery, aided by the Ring of Air. Elrond did not argue. He looked at his daughter and smiled kindly. "With this, you will be much safer. Arwen and I will be more at ease if you must travel to the far east." He asked, "When do you plan to go east to seek the remaining materials for the Philosopher's Stone?" Dewey shook his head. "There's no rush. The far east is Sauron's domain, and Hildorian's location is unknown. I want to prepare thoroughly. First, I will finish the Resurrection Stone. Perhaps I can use it to summon someone who knows where Hildorian is." Elrond nodded approvingly. "A wise precaution, but don't place all your hopes on the Resurrection Stone. If you truly want to find Hildorian and acquire the Salt of Flesh, you should seek out the two blue wizards in the far east. Like Mithrandir, they came from the west, and they arrived even earlier than him. They stayed in the east, quietly opposing Sauron's work there. They have been active for a long time and may know of Hildorian." "Blue wizards?" Dewey asked, surprised. "Do you know them?" Among the 5 wizards who came to Middle-earth, the 2 blue wizards were the most mysterious. They traveled into the east and hardly appear in the histories. Dewey knew them only by that name and by rumor that they were Maiar serving Aroma. Elrond shook his head slightly. "I met them once. They came to the Grey Havens and traveled the Great East Road to Rivendell. I received them then. They did not remain long. After crossing the Misty Mountains, they went on into the east, and I have not seen them since. I only heard in whispers that they have been stirring up resistance against Sauron, hindering his work in the east." "What are their names?" Elrond walked to the edge of the pool and with a gesture rippled the water. An image rose. 2 old men in deep blue robes. One had a short brown beard. The other wore a slightly longer gray beard. "This is Morida," he said, pointing to the man with the brown beard. "This is Romestamo," he added, indicating the gray-bearded man. "They are close friends, often together, hence the name the Blue Wizards. If you intend to go east, seek them out. They may help you find Hildorian. You might also ask Radagast or Mithrandir. Fellow wizards may have them in their circles. And of all, Saruman once traveled east with them and would have known the most about that country." He paused, and a shadow crossed his face. "But Saruman has betrayed us, and he is no longer someone to consult." Armed with this new information, Dewey did not linger. After parting from Arwen, he went to Isengard instead of returning to Weathertop. He had invested almost as much effort in guarding Isengard as in his other projects. With Saruman and Mordor close by, it could not be neglected. Fortunately, as his 3 great beasts, the 3-headed wolf, the hippogriff, and the griffin, grew stronger, the burden eased. Constant vigilance would otherwise have been exhausting. Dewey emerged from the fireplace onto the first floor of Orthanc and was immediately met by the sight of Cerberus, a 3-headed wolf as large as a small hill, sprawled across the chamber. Dewey had used an undetectable extension charm to expand the first-floor space to the size of a football field, room enough for the beast. 2 of its heads were dozing. The middle one kept watch. The alert head lifted and glared at him with fierce vigilance when he appeared. Then recognition softened its expression. The beast wagged its massive tail, lolling its tongues and making excited whimpers, as if indulging a favorite. All right, Cerberus, calm down. I've come to see you," Dewey said, laughing as he reached out to stroke the enormous creature, bracing himself so he would not be knocked over by its enthusiastic greeting. Because of his talent for legilimency, he could communicate with the three-headed wolf without difficulty. "You've guarded this place very well, Little Jong. This is your reward." Dewey produced a golden cup, conjured a large pile of meat, and even made a big basin of milk. The other two heads, roused by his scent and the smell of food, woke and immediately began vying for attention, trying to be spoiled and cute. The middle head, not to be left out, joined in. Sandwiched between those three massive heads, Dewey was nearly breathless from the overwhelming affection. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so he quickly conjured more food to distract them. After calming the three-headed wolf, Dewey went to visit the other creatures. The griffin Aslan, perched atop a tower, was not as large as the wolf, but had inherited the giant eagle's genes, and even young, was larger than an adult lion. Unlike the clingy three-headed wolf, Aslan was aloof and cool, more like a dignified big cat. He enjoyed Dewey's petting and was close to him, but he never sought affection. Extremely intelligent and loyal, Aslan carried out Dewey's orders meticulously, flying daily patrols over Isengard and its surroundings. Even in Dewey's absence, he had caught several orcs from the Misty Mountains and torn them apart with his beak and claws. Dewey, reading Aslan's memories, was surprised to learn this. He stroked the griffin's sharp beak and patted his neck. "Well done, Aslan. You make me proud," he praised. Aslan was pleased, flapped his wings, and uttered a cry that was both lion and eagle. After that, he performed his duties even more diligently, never allowing anyone to trespass on his master's territory. The hippogriff, less intelligent than Aslan or the three-headed wolf, was allowed to live freely in Isengard's woods with the mare that had birthed it. It was now about the mare's height, but still clung to her. It could already hunt rabbits and mice for itself, occasionally eating grass and wild fruit. Though it had wings and could fly, it preferred the ground. Dewey had also built a stable within the circular wall, housing several Mieras captured from the grasslands. Their foals now bore the hybrid traits of giant eagles and horses. Whether these embryos would become hippogriffs or pegasi was uncertain. Magic could not guarantee the outcome. Much depended on luck. The Pegasi Dewey had promised Elrond, Eladon, and Elrohir would come from these embryos. Beneath the surface, Dewey had established an underground breeding facility. He had implanted embryos hybridized from dragons and giant lizards and dragons and pythons into surrogate mothers. The situation was stable so far. His ultimate goal was to create a usable dragon subspecies. Like dragons in other tales, even a low-intelligence dragon's body had immense value. Dragon nerves for powerful wands, dragon hide for protective gear like gloves and cloaks, dragon blood for magical uses, scales for reinforcing shields and crafting items, hearts and livers for rare potions, and even dung as prized fertilizer for magical plants. A dragon, from head to tail, was a treasure trove. Many of Dewey's magical experiments required dragon parts, but he could not touch Smaug. His previous blood draw had left Smaug with a deep psychological scar, so Dewey decided to breed wyverns to spare Smaug the constant fear of being dismembered. Unbeknownst to him, Dewey's efforts coincided with plans brewing in the minds of Sauron and Saruman. Meanwhile, the giant lizard was the first to lay an egg. Thorondor, the giant eagle, had caught the lizard for Dewey in the Misty Mountains. Over 7 meters long, it was a fearsome beast even orcs avoided. Normally, a giant lizard could lay several eggs, but this time it laid just one, larger than an ostrich egg, hard as stone, patterned across its shell. When tapped, it rang like a stone. Dewey stared at the huge egg, unsure how to hatch it, and went to ask Smaug. The dragon was curious as well. He sensed a bloodline connection in this hybrid egg. But that curiosity did not become any fatherly affection. Dragons had no real kinship. For the sake of treasure, they would even turn on their own offspring. That instinct had thinned their numbers by the Third Age, leaving Smaug the most notorious dragon. Besides, this egg was only a hybrid, not a purebred dragon. Smaug advised Dewey that dragon eggs needed very high heat to hatch. He himself had been hatched underground, in fire. Taking the advice, Dewey set the egg in an iron pot, placed it over a fire, and covered it with a lid so it would heat evenly, essentially baking it at intense heat. While that giant egg was incubating, the python produced 3 eggs hybridized from dragon and snake. These were smaller, about the size of ostrich eggs, and patterned like snake scales. Back in the stables, the pregnant mares began to foal. 8 mares gave birth, 3 hippogriffs and 5 pegasi. The hippogriffs were sent to live with the first one in Isengard's woods, and Dewey even entrusted them to the care of the Ents of Fangorn. The pegasi were magnificent, 1 black, 1 gray, 2 red, and 1 moon white. Dewey thought the number was perfect. He intended to give the black Pegasus to Elrond, the 2 red to Elladan and Elrohir, and the gray and moon white to Celeborn and Galadriel of Lothlorien. When word reached Rivendell, the usually calm and composed Elrond teleported over in an instant, unusually animated. Elladan and Elrohir followed, impatient and eager, accompanied by Arwen, who watched with a delighted smile. Dewey couldn't help but laugh. He had never seen Elrond so lively, not the steady, wise lord he usually was. It showed how deeply the elves adored Pegasi. Dewey led them to the stable. Elrond's gaze went straight to the black Pegasus, while Elladan and Elrohir fixed theirs on the 2 red ones. Arwen, eyes sparkling like starlight, beamed, "Now Eleanor will not be lonely. He can fly the skies with his companions." She looked at the gray and moon-white Pegasi and asked, "Dewey, have you decided where these 2 will go?" Dewey smiled. "I plan to give them to Lord Celeborn and Lady Galadriel. I hope they like them." They did. Celeborn took to the gray Pegasus that shimmered silver in the sun and built an elegant stable for it. Galadriel kept the moon-white Pegasus in her private garden, where it drank sweet, enchanted spring water and grazed on lush, magic-fed grass. Dewey was surprised and pleased that the Pegasi were so prized. Because of them, his standing among the elves rose significantly. They called the Pegasi Sky Horses and gave Dewey the honorary title Lord of the Sky Horses. But his attention soon turned back to the dragon eggs. After a month of high-heat incubation, the giant egg began to show signs of hatching. The iron pot trembled with the heat. Dewey moved it away from the fire and floated the scalding egg onto a table to cool, waiting quietly. The shaking grew more violent as something inside struggled to break free. At last, the shell split with a sharp crack, and a sticky yolk-smeared hatchling tumbled onto the table. The newborn was covered in black scales, lizard-like, with yellow eyes and bronze horns. Its long tail bristled with similar-colored spikes. Dewey collected the eggshell and the residual fluid for potion ingredients and leaned in to study the hatchling. It gave a tentative, warning hiss. When Dewey reached forward, it spat a spray of sparks, but the sparks were stopped by an invisible barrier before they could reach him. The hybrid hatchling had inherited a dragon's fire breath, but far weaker than a true dragon's. Its intelligence was low, only a bit above ordinary beasts. It had also taken on the dragonish fascination with shiny things. Though much reduced, it loved glittering objects. Thus, the first wyvern of Middle-earth was born. A week later, the 3 python dragon eggs hatched. These were different. 3 dark green hatchlings with long, stout bodies, 2 gleaming golden horns, dense, tiny scales, and a more serpentine aspect. They had 4 legs and wings on their backs, a striking dragon-like sight. 218. Resurrection Stone Dewey was delighted by the newly born drakes. They had not inherited a dragon's intelligence, and their magic and constitution were far inferior to true dragons, but they were still of dragonkind and could not be dismissed. More importantly, every part of a drake held great value. Dewey planned to open a dragon farm in the Misty Mountains behind Isengard, raising the creatures in separate enclosures across the range. He went into the Misty Mountains himself, cleared a vast area with magic, drove off a few scattered orcs, and layered ward after ward around the farm. He even borrowed the power of a ring to hide the place across hundreds of kilometers. The work took him a full fortnight and nearly drained his magic. Only the Golden Cup restored him. The result was striking. The entire tract of land vanished from every map of the Misty Mountains, and to the naked eye, simply did not exist. Anyone approaching the area would be touched by a subtle confundus charm and instinctively detour, never stumbling inside. The dragons within would not leave either. They lived their lives entirely within the farm. Having invested so much effort, Dewey had no intention of breeding only a few. He continued to crossbreed giant lizards, pythons, even crocodiles with true dragons, striving to create new kinds of drakes. Before long, the farm teemed with variety: fire-breathing lizard-like drakes, poison-wielding green ones, serpentine gray drakes, and plans for crocodilian black ones. some of which belonged to the future. When he had the breeding well in hand, Dewey set the project aside and turned to another weighty matter. With the year's end approaching, it was time to forge his resurrection stone. As the old year gave way to the new, the Third Age would pass from 2944 into 2945. Dewey had lived nearly 4 years in Middle-earth. 3 of them had gone since the quest for the Lonely Mountain. At the stroke of midnight, he stood atop Orthanc, a magic circle and ancient runes of mithril beneath his feet. He meant to use Orthanc's amplifying power to craft the resurrection stone. Around him, he had prepared the necessary death matter and 2 pouches of holding. In the center of the circle sat the very furnace he had once used to smelt mithril. As the moment neared, Dewey activated the array. Under Orthanc's magnification, the circle's power multiplied manifold. The magic of earth and sky seemed to gather into a swirling storm that poured into the furnace. Moonlight and starlight were drawn down and streamed into the crucible. Flames of spellfire roared within, blazing with searing heat. Dewey scattered powdered dragon blood into the blaze. The flames flared blood red, hotter than before, and within them a dragon of fire coalesced, clawing and breathing flame. Chanting, Dewey flicked his wand, opened an obsidian flask, and poured death matter into the furnace. The cold substance chilled the air instantly. The black mist-like death matter hovered within, scorched by the blood-red fire, while the flame dragon inhaled it and formed a tiny black grain in its belly. Life of the guilty, offered in sacrifice, may return the dead to life, Dewey intoned, and then opened a pouch and tipped out 7 petrified orcs. Under their terrified gaze, he cast them, cold as death, into the furnace, where they burned to ash amid shrieks. When the 7th had crumbled to dust, midnight struck and the new year began. The sacrifice awakened a mysterious force. The Netherworld, a realm parallel to the living, shimmered above Orthanc. No extra circle was needed. Dewey saw the Netherworld like a mirage overlapping the world of the living. The cold essence of that realm flowed in and poured into the crucible. Inside the flame dragon's belly, the grain, smaller than a rice seed, grew and took shape, becoming a gleaming obsidian pebble. Wicked souls who linger, traded away, may bring the dead back. Dewey opened the 2nd pouch and released 13 orc specters he had captured while gathering death matter within the Netherworld itself. He fed the 13 wraiths into the furnace one by one. Each time an orc wraith entered, the flaming dragon swallowed it and fused it into the obsidian grain. As each wraith merged, the little gem seemed to become a tiny black hole, drawing in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and devouring it. For the next stretch of time, every hour, Dewey took 7 orcs and 13 wraiths from his pouches and fed them into the furnace in turn, regularly sprinkling in dragon blood powder to keep the flames alive. Forging a resurrection stone is a forbidden and supremely evil rite. The 2nd Peveril brother, who first created such a thing, had descended into madness to bring his love back. He sacrificed an entire Muggle village and hunted wraiths across the land. In the end, he could summon only a cold, tormented shade, not true resurrection. The failure shattered him, and in despair, he took his own life. Dewey had no wish to repeat those horrors, so he chose dark creatures, orcs, to gather the toll. He scoured the nearby misty mountains until he had enough. The array ran without pause, and the furnace burned on. At dawn on the 3rd day, when the first rays of the rising sun struck the tower, the flames died of their own accord, and the array stilled. Dewey opened the furnace and drew out a gem that looked like obsidian. The black jewel was crystal clear, no larger than a little finger. At its heart ran a jagged black fissure like a cat's vertical pupil, a tiny doorway into an unknown place. Looking at the resurrection stone in his hand, Dewey's face lit with anticipation. He turned it 3 times. A moment later, tall, regal, and scholarly, a shade of an elf stepped before him. More solid than a wraith, yet less than living, he wore an elven circlet. His hair bore the dark hue of the Noldor, and his face was surpassingly fair, gray-blue eyes deep with intelligence. Startled to find himself here, he looked at Dewey and asked, "You summoned me. Who are you?" Dewey bowed in the Noldoran fashion and spoke in Quenya. "Master Celebrimbor, forgive this intrusion upon your rest. I am Dewey the black-robed wizard. I called you with the resurrection stone." The spirit before him was Celebrimbor, the elven artisan who had forged the 3 rings of the Eldar and many other rings of power. A resurrection stone? Celebrimbor's gaze fell on the gem in Dewey's hand. You wrought this? Dewey nodded, slightly embarrassed. Though it bears that name, it can summon only a shade, not restore true life. Rather feeble, I fear. Grandson of Fëanor and maker of the 3 rings, Celebrimbor possessed matchless skill. He could see the stone's nature at a glance. Instinctively, he reached for it, but his ghostly hand passed through Dewey and through the gem. The realization struck. He was dead. His hand froze. A flicker of sorrow crossed his features. Then he composed himself and smiled at Dewey's modesty. Dewey, you are far too modest. To recall the dead, even as a shade, is a marvel. It touches upon the very laws of spirit. Save the Lord of Mandos, none have such sway. He added with a knowing tilt. Though it cannot restore life, it can summon the long gone, like me, to reveal secrets and lost arts buried by time. That is its true worth. So, Wizard Dewey, what do you ask of me? Celebrimbor asked. Dewey began to answer, but the world seemed to stop. The wind died, clouds hung motionless, and even Celebrimbor's expression froze. Alarmed, Dewey found he could not move. His limbs refused him, and only his mind remained clear, as though his body had become a puppet. Then a formless, vast will descended, sacred and terrible. His soul quivered beneath it. He felt himself overwhelmed by the very master of spirits. That mighty gaze fixed first upon the resurrection stone, then upon Dewey. 2:19, departure to the far east. When that will washed over him, Dewey felt as though every secret he had was laid bare. He was exposed, stripped naked before an unfathomable gaze. There was no malice in it, only a detached, curious attention, but the sensation plunged him into a panic, the helplessness a low-dimensional being feels confronted with a higher-dimensional intelligence. Then a majestic voice echoed inside his soul, threaded with a faint approval. Good, it intoned. You may come to my halls of Mandos in the future, wizard from another world. Before the sentence finished, the will receded. Time resumed, the wind stirred, and the world's sounds returned. Dewey's heart hammered, his emotions roiled. Could that have been Namo, Mandos, the Lord of the Dead? He had not expected that creating the resurrection stone would draw the attention of Avala, and with a single glance, his deepest secret had been revealed. Wizard Dewey? Wizard Dewey? Celebrimbor's voice pulled him back. He looked at Dewey with concern. Are you all right? Dewey forced himself to relax and shook his head. I'm fine. I just spaced out for a moment. Beneath his outward calm, excitement flickered. The gaze had strengthened his soul dramatically, an advance that would normally take him 10 years of meditation. His mental power had surged. His magic pool had increased. Just a glance from Mandos had such an effect? This was the power of the Valar. He swallowed his astonishment and stated his purpose. Master Celebrimbor, your craftsmanship is peerless. You can forge rings like your 3 rings of the Elves. I want to learn your techniques so I can forge a ring of my own. Celebrimbor had long suspected Dewey's aim, but he looked unhappy. The craft of the rings of power came through Sauron, he said. He came as Anatar and deceived us in Eregion. Through our hands, the 9 for men and the 7 for dwarves were made. I alone, suspicious, made the 3 of the Elves. Had I not, they too might have been defiled and become Sauron's thralls. I hid the 3 and entrusted them to safe hands, Celebrimbor continued, and I swore never to use them while Sauron held the 1. Still, do you truly wish to learn to forge rings of power? Dewey nodded and took from around his neck the ring that hung like a pendant. Celebrimbor examined it, brows knitting. This ring bears poor workmanship and a blunt pursuit of amplified power. Whose work is this? Saruman, Dewey said, the White Wizard. He colluded with Sauron and betrayed his calling. Dewey briefly recounted Saruman's fall. Celebrimbor sighed, stunned by how much had occurred since his death. Upon learning the One Ring was no longer with Sauron and that Dewey was close to Galadriel and Elrond, he relented and agreed to teach the craft. Dewey was elated. He had coveted the 3 for a long time, but could not touch them, so to study with Celebrimbor was a rare opportunity. He even dreamed of summoning Fëanor, Celebrimbor's grandfather and creator of the Silmarils. If such genius could collaborate with Celebrimbor, they might forge rings surpassing the 3. But the Resurrection Stone's summons were limited. It required a strong emotional connection between summoner and the deceased. Dewey had none with Celebrimbor. He found another way. He asked Galadriel for a portion of her memories of Celebrimbor and implanted them into his own memory. Galadriel had been close to Celebrimbor. Indeed, it was at her suggestion that the three were hidden, and she was entrusted with Narya. By adopting Galadriel's affectionate recollections, Dewey created an emotional link sufficient for the stone to call Celebrimbor. The connection was artificial, but it worked. The idea owed something to the memory manipulations of Professor Lockhart, an odious fraud in another world who stole others' deeds by stealing their memories. With the crown of wisdom to contain the implants, Dewey avoided harming his own mind. The memories lived in the crown like a portable drive. Wearing it gave him the memories, removing it erased them. That way, he could summon without risking schizophrenia. Over the following months, Dewey repeatedly summoned Celebrimbor and learned. His foundation in goblin forging techniques, alchemy, and some Noldor methods, combined with the crown and concentrated study, let him progress rapidly. Celebrimbor was surprised at Dewey's talent and often said that had Dewey lived in his day, he would have taken him as an apprentice. After half a year, Dewey began to perfect the ring he carried. He was not yet capable of forging a ring of power from scratch, but he could reshape and refine what he had. He aimed to create an earth ring to complement the three. If they embodied water, fire, and air, his would be earth. Though he could not fully realize it yet, he redirected the ring's design that way. Under Celebrimbor's guidance, he corrected the ring's flaws. The ring no longer caused physical strain to the wearer. Dewey could finally wear it on his finger instead of keeping it as a pendant. He also enabled the ring to store magic and, when needed, form a potent magical barrier whose strength depended on the amount of stored power. If filled sufficiently, the barrier could buy him time even against Sauron. Dewey charged the ring every day, pouring all his magic into it, then restored himself with the golden cup and filled it again. After more than a month of this, the ring was full enough to assure him of a degree of safety. Ready to move, he said farewell to Arwen and prepared to head east. He would travel without conspicuous companions. The east was Sauron's realm. Attracting attention would be suicidal. No Smaug, no Thorondor. He intended to find Hildorian, the birthplace of men, and harvest the salt of flesh there, an ingredient he needed to create the Philosopher's Stone and hasten his path to immortality. Time was not on his side. The other route, using the Balrog's undying flame to become a phoenix, would take nearly a year to purge its evil taint. He could not simply wait. Before leaving, Dewey tried to learn the whereabouts of the two blue wizards. Gandalf told him the blue wizards had long been established in the Far East by the time Gandalf reached Middle-earth. Being in the West, he had little contact with them. He suggested Dewey speak to Radagast the Brown, who had come earlier and kept close ties with birds and beasts. Dewey went to Radagast's hut. The brown wizard lived among the woods and learned news through animal friends. "I remember a flock of wild geese that flew from the Far East some years ago," Radagast said, searching his mind. Dewey placed the crown of wisdom on Radagast briefly, and the old wizard's memory snapped into place. "They stayed with me for a while. According to them, people in blue robes lead local uprisings and fights near the Sea of Rune. You could look there. You might find them." Grateful, Dewey thanked him. Narrowing the search to the region near the Sea of Rune made finding the blue wizards far less impossible. He bade Radagast farewell and set out for the east, first planning to pass through the royal city of Rohan to check in before heading further into Sauron's lands. 220. Disguised Magus Adoras, the royal city of Rohan, sits on an isolated green hill at the northern foot of the White Mountains, in the wide valley of the Firienholt. The Snowborn River winds past the city's eastern side. Ditches, ramparts, and thorned fences gird the hill, and a black city gate guards the only entrance. At the hill's summit stands Meduseld, the golden hall of the King of Rohan. With a soft pop, Duer appeared in an empty corner outside Adoras. He had traveled from Isengard, using a series of apparitions. Apparition requires that one has been to a place before or possesses a clear, accurate image of it. Duer had collected descriptions of Adoras from Elrond, Gandalf, and others until the city existed concretely in his mind. That is how he could apparate precisely to a city he had never physically visited. Rowan's lands were open pastures and rolling grasslands, the livelihood of its people centered on horses and flocks. It boasted the finest horse breeds in Middle-earth, powerful cavalry, and steeds prized across the West. The mares Duir had used to crossbreed and cultivate hippogriffs and pegasi, and even to breed the line that produced Shadowfax, came from the Maeras of Rohan, descendants of the steed of Arome. Such horses were the private mounts of Rohan's royal house. Duir eyed the city, its totem, fittings, and everyday life all honored the horse, and walked toward the gate with the calm curiosity of a traveler. The guards there watched the steady flow of people for anyone suspicious. Duir's tall figure drew attention, towering compared to most, dressed in an elegant but restrained black robe, his bearing graceful and noble like an elf's, yet with an authority that hinted at power. Though Duir himself was unaware of the impression he made, others could not help noticing him, even when he kept his presence muted. The captain of the guards stepped forward with respectful caution. "Sir, where do you come from? Outsiders must register to enter the city." Duir had no wish to cause trouble. His best chance to secure a welcome, from experience, was to register at the heart of the city, Meduseld itself, so he didn't hide his name. "I am Duir of Isengard Orthanc to the west. I'm here to travel and to visit King Thengel." The captain's face changed. News of Isengard's new lord had already reached Rohan. Rumors clung to the name Duir, some wild, some fearful, and stories even claimed he kept a giant dragon. The captain hesitated only a moment before. With sudden haste, he bowed. "Please wait, my lord. I will report at once." Inside Meduseld, King Thengel sat in council with his chief advisor, Mario. Mario had once commanded the western border at the fords of Isen and had earned promotion for his service against the Dunlendings. When the servant reported Duir's arrival, Thengel's eyes brightened, and he ordered Duir to be invited immediately. Mario, however, frowned. Mario's suspicion went back to his duties on the western border. He distrusted the Dunlendings deeply. He had opposed King Thengel's decision to make peace with them and had long believed they were treacherous and uncivilized. That prejudice extended to Duir, who had taken the Dunlendings under his charge. Mario's courtesy toward the visitor would be formal at best. When Duir entered the hall, Thengel rose from his throne and welcomed him with genuine warmth. "Wizard Duir, it has been over a year. Your coming honors us." Thengel's tone left no arrogance in the royal greeting. He was eager to befriend the powerful new neighbor. Duir inclined his head and returned the pleasantries. "It is good to see you again, King Thengel. Your glory remains." Thengel introduced the advisor beside him. "This is my chief advisor, Mario." Mario offered a tight smile. "I have heard much of you, Wizard Duir," he said. "Small world, I was once stationed near Isengard at the fords of Isen. I regret never having visited Orthanc myself." His tone shifted to what was meant as cordial curiosity. "But what brings you to adore us? If there is anything you need, we will gladly help." Thengel echoed the invitation heartily. "Yes, if you require assistance, speak freely." Duir's eyes lingered on Mario, and he caught the false warmth beneath the words. He felt the hostility and for a moment was tempted to probe the man's mind with legitimacy. He had learned to restrain his mental powers. Too much noise from others could scatter his own will, and he had trained himself not to let his mind leak. When Thengel intervened with more welcoming talk, Duir let the urge pass. "I came on no urgent business," he said lightly. "I have heard of the beauty of the Rohan Plains and wish to see them. I came at your invitation." Thengel did not pry. "Then join us. We will prepare a feast in your honor." Duir accepted. As the servants moved to prepare the banquet, a system prompt pulsed in his awareness. "Hogwarts Sign-in System. Rohan. Adoris located. Sign in?" "Sign in," Duir replied. "Sign in successful. Congratulations. Metamorph Magus talent acquired." Duir blinked. He had not expected that for a sign-in. Metamorph Magus was not the same as an animagus. An animagus transforms into a single animal form through advanced transfiguration. A metamorph magus was an innate, rare talent. One could alter appearance at will without potions or external aids like polyjuice, with no time limit and not easily reversed by other magic. Nymphadora Tonks came to mind as an example. She changed her looks on a whim and even exhibited hair color shifts tied to mood. This talent suited disguise perfectly and was more flexible than animagus transfiguration. Dwyer felt a subtle plasticity through his body, as if his features could be shaped by thought. He refrained from experimenting. The hall was full of faces. Instead, he went to the banquet, curious. Rohirrim feasts were hearty and unrestrained, meat and ale in abundance. Mario played host with exaggerated friendliness, raising cup after cup of wine and probing Dwyer with casual questions. Dwyer let him. His elven-like constitution made ordinary alcohol ineffective. He drank steadily and remained clear-eyed. Mario, by contrast, flushed and laughed more loudly with each glass until finally he could barely stand. When Mario collapsed, utterly drunk, the hall erupted in surprise and delight. "You don't get drunk?" Mario slurred, incredulous. Dwyer shook his head and gave a faint smile. "No, I feel a slight tingle in my fingers. Perhaps I am already tipsy." Mario's face reddened further. Anger, humiliation, or pure drunkenness, it was hard to tell. And then he toppled onto the floor. Servants hurried to carry him away amid the crowd's laughter and Dwyer's discreet applause. Thengel clapped him on the shoulder. "Mario is the one among us with the greatest tolerance. Never thought we'd see him beaten. Well done, Dwyer." Dwyer demurred, but his gaze followed the unconscious advisor. An opportunity presented itself. In sleep, Mario's mental defenses were down. Dwyer allowed his legilimency to slip a thread into the man's mind and read. Mario's memories unfolded like pages. His service on the frontier, his fierce disdain for the Dunlendings, the moments he had argued with Thengel over treaties, the bitterness of feeling ignored. Dwyer's expression cooled as he scanned the images. A thread of mockery touched his mouth. He learned enough and then withdrew his probing, letting the servants carry Mario away. When the banquet ended, Dwyer returned to his guest chamber. He conjured a large hand mirror and stood before it. The metamorphomagus talent thrummed beneath his skin. He felt his hair lengthen and change from black to a shimmering gold. His dark eyes paled to deep blue. His features shifted, cheekbones sharpening, skin smoothing, ears narrowing into the elegant points of an elf. The man in the glass was not the Dwyer who had entered Adoras, but a striking male elf, calm and unmissable.